Hey guys, welcome to my channel. Today we are gonna be doing Dekus Christmas Tale, a Christmas special. With that out of the way, let's begin chapter 1. Prologue. Winter, the chilliest season of the year. Such a cold time. Gentle snow covering the ground, icy roads that make you cautious of how you walk, the cold winds brushing up against your face, the leafless trees standing tall and the piles of snow surrounding them. It was a majestic wonderland of white. Anywhere you would look would only end up in finding snow, to which it seemed as if there were no limit to where it would reach out to. A beautiful sight such as this came and went, with no time to waste as there was so much to do. The students of Class 1 knew that very well, as this was a winter break none of them would forget. It had all started back in November to when out of seemingly nowhere the grass had been starting to cover in a thin layer of frost. With this being made apparent, the students knew that it was only the beginning to the long-awaited snowy season. Sheets of snow started to escalate and cover Japan in such a short few weeks, turning everywhere into hells of pure whiteness. Everyone over at UA were very aware of such a rapid climate change. Students started to show up in winter jackets, the daylight became shorter, and the training facilities had to be well maintained during times such as these, as the staff wouldn't tolerate weather interfering with the hard work that these students had all put in over these last few months. In short, winter had arrived at full throttle. Chapter 1, December 18th. We now flash forward to Saturday, December 18th. Quite some time had passed since those first layers of frost had showed up. It was nearing what most people would call the most wonderful time of the year, also known as Christmas to most folk. It's a holiday of gift-giving, kindness and joy alike. Many join together on this day every year to celebrate such a magnificent holiday, including our favorite band of heroes from Class 1A. Class 1A, Homeroom. A group of heroes were joined together in their homeroom, waiting anxiously as it was the last period of the day before their holiday break started. Everyone sat impatiently in their seats. All they could think about was what could be done over the holidays. After all, they had an entire 2 weeks to themselves. There were so many things to do, so many in fact that a certain someone was whispering across to their desk mate in a discussion about what exactly they hoped to do over the break. Here, Denki Kaminari whispered. I'm torn between sledding or snowboarding. Yuri shrugged before giving him a straight answer. I'd go with snowboarding. Really? He replied with a smile. Yeah, I can see where you're coming from. Alright, quiet down everyone. Kaminari had been interrupted before he could finish his sentence. Their sensei, Azawa, had decided that with the school day coming to an end, that he'd notified the classroom about the holidays before the bell rang. Now I know you're all dreading the time until the period ends. Trust me, I am as well. The school day was very close to coming to an end. I have a few words to all of you before that time comes. However, the students listened closely to his words, as they usually held importance. First off, I'd just like to remind you all to use your break time wisely. It's not very long. He scanned around the class to make sure everyone was in fact listening. Secondly, he continued. Now that most of you have your provisional licenses, a quick glance was given to Shadow Todoroki and Katsuki Bakugo, students from Wana who surprisingly did not receive their license during the dreadful provisional exam. Both the students took a look around the room to ensure if anyone had been staring at them, Bakugo especially. Aizawa noticed this, anyway. He continued on. Although you have much more freedom to use your quirks, you should remember that your licenses are a privilege and can be revoked. He glanced around the room as a few select students' faces lit up with surprise. That means no immaturely using your quirk. One last look around the classroom was given before ending his speech. Alright, he said dryly. Go have fun. The bell rung, being almost perfectly synced up with the end of Aizawa's speech. The students raised from their seats in excitement, the louder students clearly over-exaggerating how excited they were. With the final bell being rung, that signified school was over, and it was time for a holiday break. Happiness and relief filled the air. After a suspenseful and adventurous semester, well-deserved winter break filled nearly everyone's head. Izuku Midoriya stood from his seat, grabbing his book bag and slowly headed for the hallway. He had been halfway there when he heard his name called out. Hey Deku. It was a cheery voice that he recognized very well. He turned to the source of this mystery voice, only to be met with a familiar and bubbly brunette, a Chako Uraraka. Oh, hey Uraraka. He spoke with little confidence as Uraraka was a person of interest to him. What's up? Oh? Nothing much. She said with a cheery tone. I just needed to express how excited I am for winter break. She stared at the emerald-haired boy with interest. Aren't you excited as well? Uraraka excitingly asked. Well, Izuku replied, scratching the back of his head. I am really excited, yeah. It's nice to have a bit of a break from all of the action. He paused for a moment, thinking about the events that had occurred from the beginning of school up until now. To think that we've been so busy over these last few months. Certain memories filled his head. He could remember the most striking ones, such as defending a school facility from the villains, placing in the semi-finals during the UA Sports Festival, the training he did with a veteran hero, Gran Torino. He had come a long way in such a short time. I know. Uraraka interrupted, trying not to be rude. It's a bit of a stress or that we have been in quite a few dangerous situations lately. She sighed, a slight frown took place of her smile. It's like we never get a break. There had been a seemingly endless amount of crises that only transpired into operations on a much larger scale. The most recent of them being an investigation set out to arrest a deadly survivor of the Yakuza affiliation known by his alias, Overhaul. Indeed, Uraraka. A taller student with dark hair, sporting glasses, stood behind Uraraka. However, while it is true that we may not catch a break often with all this chaos, we must remember what we are. Ida stood confidently, fixing his glasses. We are heroes in training. We must rise when we are needed. Yeah. After all, we have saved many people these last few months. Midoriya stated, nodding in agreement with Ida. That is correct. A hero's job can be very time-consuming. He shifted his view between his two friends. The greatest satisfaction is having people look up to you in such a positive way for the generous deeds done for the world. Uraraka looked up at Ida. She was wondering if she had sounded selfish for bringing up a personal need. However, Ida continued with his speech. Uraraka is very right regarding her own well-being. The job of a hero can also be very stressful given the conditions you're placed under. I do agree though that our winter break is well-deserved. Wow. You always know what to say, Ida. Ichako stated with a smile. You're really confident with speeches about these types of things. Ida took a bow of respect to her kind compliment. I respect such words coming from you, Uraraka. He looked up from his bow and stood firm. However, as class president it is my responsibility to make sure that we're all motivated to our acts of heroism. Whether it takes a speech or push, I shall and will do my best to shape this class into honest and efficient students. You're pretty committed to this role, Izuku said, scratching the back of his head. And Uraraka's definitely right about your speeches. He nodded in agreement to the earlier statement. You're not only a great hero, but you're also a determined class president. Yeah. Ichako threw her fist into the air with excitement. Ida pushed his glasses upwards, looking down with a rather menacing smile. As your friend, I appreciate all of these thoughtful compliments. He spoke with a quiet tone, as if he was trying to act intimidating yet appreciative. The two stared at their class president with confusion. It was uncommon to see their classmate become so quiet and eerie, unless. However, he suddenly raised his voice, directing his hand towards them, shifting his aim from the two. It was a signature pose Ida had usually done. As your class president, I cannot accept such kind words. He seemed as if he had been about to start on another one of his overdone rants. Izuku slowly said, interrupting Ida. He hadn't tried to be rude about it. Where is everyone? All three of them glanced around the room. No one excluding the three of them had been in the room. Is everyone gone already? Every seat in the room had been empty. Not one student beside their trio remained at their desk. The door to the classroom slid open, as Alwa stepped in. Shouldn't you all be out enjoying the break? He stared at them with deadpan eyes. All your classmates have already left. Don't tell me the three of you are planning on handing me some kind of early Christmas present. He groaned, clearly not enjoying the thought of a gift. And no, sorry sir. We were just heading back to our dorms. Ida took a bow of mercy towards his sensei. Well, alright. As Alwa turned to his desk that hadn't been cleaned off. There had been a few short stacks of loose papers that he needed to take back with him. And Mr. Izawa? Asked Midoriya hesitantly. Is it a ton of work you have to do over the break? He shifted his view, acknowledging the stacks of loose papers. Does being a teacher here force you to complete so much work even over holidays? Izawa shook his head. Only some of it is paperwork. He placed his hand on a much shorter stack than the others. The rest is just some worksheets you'll have to be doing when school starts back up. He placed his hand on another stack. There had been one left, however. Hey sir. Uraraka called out to her sensei. What? He replied with a dull tone. She pointed at the first stack. If the first one is paperwork, her arm hastily steered to the next one. And if that one is filled with assignments we'll be receiving after the break. The aim of her finger had swerved to the last pile. Then what are these for? There's nothing written on any of them. The last stack had just been a bunch of loose papers with nothing written upon them. Paper, for letters. Izawa filled his students' curiosity. The letters, all three of them shouted out with surprise. They had been taken aback by the thought of their sensei writing letters. It may have been due to the fact that he always seemed distant from other teachers, not the type of person who would reach out to people. It wasn't that he seemed lonely, but quite a bit of the time he was always seen by himself. It's a bit tedious, he told them. However, I have family that don't live relatively close. They aren't in the loop of technology and prefer stationary letters, so I do that instead of trying to teach even my parents how to get online. Their reclusive sensei took a brisk gaze towards the empty papers. Well, he turned back to the three who still hadn't left the classroom. You should all head back to your dorms. I'll be cleaning up and leaving soon. The gang of three bowed in respect and took their leave. UA campus after school. The trio of friends strolled down a concrete pathway, heading towards their dorms. It was after school, the sun was soon to set, which would bring the earlier nights that winter was known for. It was just one of those traits that winter had, a truly unique season that you wouldn't find on anywhere but Earth. However, while it certainly was a beautiful sight, many could argue that winter became quite a hassle. Looking past the chilly days and long nights would grant anyone the ability to see and admire the true beauty of the world around them. It was snowing softly as walking back from the school continued. The walk wasn't a very long one per se, so they took their time to gaze upon the scenery and talk among St themselves. It's snowing, Ida stated. At this rate we could very well have the amount of snow doubled if not increased gradually by morning. He seemed a bit concerned about the growth. Do you really believe it's that much? Izuku replied, curious. It doesn't seem to be snowing that hard. He stared up into the sky, focusing on the snowfall. Indeed. Ida nodded, looking up as well. For all we know, the degree in which it's snowing has a likely probability to expand. After all, it did seem to just start. He looked down from the evening sky and turned to Uraraka. Wouldn't you agree, Uraraka? There was no reply. Uraraka. Izuku cast his eyes to her. She seemed to be staring off into the distance, cherishing the view. It seemed as if she didn't seem to hear Ida call out to her. He didn't know if speaking louder would work, so he put his hand out to grab her shoulder. This made him nervous, but he didn't want to shout at Uraraka, especially when she was walking right beside him. His hand was about to touch her shoulder when he suddenly stopped. He had caught a glimpse of her face. That was enough to make him freeze for a moment. In the small gap of time from realizing she was unaware of Ida's question to reaching out towards her, Izuku himself had seen a sight that rivaled the beauty of winter scenery. In that moment, he saw Uraraka in an entirely new light. It was as if it was the day of the entrance exam all over again. When he first met her, all he could do was blush and stammer. She was adorable. But now, she was stunningly beautiful. More so than any moment he could recall. Her hair was brushed back by the cold gust of wind that blew by, her cheeks were light pink from the frosty air, her smile had warmed him even in weather such as this. All Izuku could do was be amazed. He nearly forgot Ida's request to gain her attention. He tapped her shoulder lightly, Uraraka, shakily calling her name. In a near instant she snapped out of her trance and turned to the green-haired boy. Oh, sorry. She quickly apologized. I was a little distracted. Embarrassed, she rubbed the back of her head, hoping that she wouldn't come off as rude for not paying attention. Oh, that's okay. He replied timidly, blushing. Ida just wanted to know your opinion on the snow. Oh? She took a glance at Ida nodding in agreement, then looking up to the evening sky as she thought to herself. Well, I guess you could say it's snowing quite a bit. The bubbly girl acknowledged the pacing of this snowfall. She was about to speak until she had been cut off by her classmate. Look out. Midoriya warned her. In that instant she felt her legs not corresponding with her head about where to move. The young girl had lost balance and in turn was going to slip and fall to the ground. While not paying attention, Chako had in fact walked over a strip of ice. She was startled and hadn't had enough time to use her quirk out of shock. Her eyes closed as she braced herself for the fall. Gah! She let out a cry of despair. Uraraka couldn't have believed she would have been so abnormally clumsy and slipped over a glistening patch of ice. It hadn't been the fact that she slipped just now that made her upset, but the fact that twice in the span of few minutes, she hadn't been paying attention to her surroundings, and speculated she would have made a fool of herself in front of her friends. To her the pain of standing up and facing them had to have been worse than the physical pain of falling to the ground. Suddenly, Uraraka felt a set of hands grasp her by the waist. She opened her eyes slowly and saw that she hadn't in fact fell to the ground as she was supposed to. Her attention trailed up the set of arms that had caught her, to which she saw Izuku. His face was red, and he looked very nervous at being in such a position. Deku. Chako called out to Izuku, blushing. Why, you almost fell. Izuku turned his head. He wasn't trying to make eye contact out of anxiousness. Sorry. I didn't want you to have fall. The shy young man spoke in shaky sentences. Izuku didn't think he would be this close to Uraraka. Even the thought of a situation like this would have normally made his face flush up from his fondness for her. Hey, are you okay? Midoriya finally asked. Uraraka nodded slowly. She too was also red. Just like Midoriya had been fond of her, she had also taken a liking to him. Between the both of them laid feelings that had not yet been disclosed to one another. These feelings had developed only a few months ago, before winter had decided to spring from around the corner. While the two weren't seen flirting or hanging out very often, it was transparent that there was something between the both of them. Ida stared at his two friends who appeared frozen. To him there seemed to be an odd tension in the air. Well, he finally spoke up. I'm glad that you didn't end up falling. He took a glance at his now embarrassed classmate. The class rep shifted his view to Izuku, also, Midoriya. That was a good save for your side. I'm impressed, your reflexes there were quite quick. He expressed his relief for Uraraka. We should continue on heading back to the dorms. The tall man gazed upwards at the sky. It was becoming late. I believe it's going to become night soon. Why, yeah. They both replied. Izuku let Uraka stand. Both of them turned away from each other, their faces flushed with red. The rest of the walk was rather short, the three of them didn't speak much. Izuku and Ichako avoided eye contact, with one catching glimpses of the other, but never having direct contact. It could have very well been because of their semi-romantic exchange between one another that caused such an awkward tension. After all of this occurred, the trio had finally made their way to the dorm. With it being ever so close, to doors to 1A's dorm opened. The three walked in. 1A dormitory. Shut up. As soon as they entered the dorm there was yelling. The three of them had spot on theories of who could be shouting so loudly. The source of the noise was coming from the lounge in the lobby. A few of their classmates had been sitting around, with the exception of one of them standing with a pose that could only be viewed as intimidation. This student had a frightening face of fury. He was glancing around at the group of students. Some were petrified in fear, while others were trying to hold back their laughter at his outburst. This young man's name was Katsuki Bakugo, known to some as the embodiment of anger. Iida ran over and instantly started to rant towards Bakugo about his volume. You shouldn't be yelling. We're inside and shouldn't be speaking at such a level like you are. Haven't you heard of anything called inside voices? Bakugo became quite annoyed after Iida started scolding him. Their personalities contrasted to a great degree. A real advocate who was over the top polite and formal to everyone he met, did not sit well with a loud-mouthed and vulgar hothead who was easily angered. Seriously, shut the hell up already. Bakugo yelled at Iida in reply to his rant. I don't need to be lectured as soon as I'm free from class. One of the many things Bakugo had a disliking to was someone trying to control what he was saying or doing. He viewed himself as a free man who made his own choices. While that may have been true, Bakugo's choices more often than not landed him or his classmates in the midst of dealing with a difficult situation. You both are yelling, Sayu Ase, the frog girl stated. It's a little annoying. Well, I was just trying to assert authority here. Iida said, pushing his glasses up in embarrassment. He didn't mean to be an annoyance, nor did he mean to break any rules either. He just wanted Bakugo to calm down. TCH, Bakugo scoffed. Just leave me alone and maybe I won't yell so damn much. He glanced at Iida before taking a seat on the couch. Izuku and Ichako decided that now was a better time to take a seat, rather than having to sit and watch Bakugo explode in his infantile rage. Besides, I wouldn't be shouting if Brain Dead over here didn't insult me. He took his arm and pointed at Denki, who was laying on the couch across from him, playing a handheld video game. Dude, Kaminari replied, seeming focused on his game. I just said that you can act like the Grinch sometimes. As predicted by everyone else, Bakugo stood once more and clenched his fist. Don't talk about me like that, you freaking dumbass. Bakugo had shouted once more, louder than before. The Grinch is just some green dweeb who dresses up like an old man and steals from kids. You did forget that he does it out of anger. Kirishima joined in, kind of like you. With that, Bakugo turned and gave his close friend a dead-eyed glare. Hey, man. The Crimson Boy expressed in defense. There's no need to look at me like that. He suddenly became a little nervous, hoping that his profane pal wouldn't end up trying to pick a fight with him. It's pretty manly to have an attitude like that though. Bakugo had become a bit calmer after hearing this, which in turn relieved Ichiro. You let nothing take you down, Doc Kirishima's. Words made Bakugo grow a smug grin on his face, ironically enough resembling the Grinch's own smile. You're right. The prideful young man crossed his arms. He felt victorious. Nothing is going to take me down. Especially not Tazza Kid over here. Hey. Kaminari said, sounding offended. Even though I act a bit dumb, I'm still pretty cool, right guys? The electric blonde looked up from his game. He was looking around the lounge with clear insecurity about how he was viewed to his peers. Alright. Guys. You're pretty cool, Kaminari. Midoriya spoke up, wanting to make his friend feel better about himself. The rest of the room fell silent, as most of them didn't know what to think of Kaminari. Of course he had his cool moments. He was a laid-back man, and his core could be deemed as cool, but there had been times where he didn't live up to expectations. Of course, Iida said, raising his voice. We're all equal here. I am ashamed of those that kept silent. The positive and responsible man gazed around at his classmates that had kept silent. Shouldn't we all be making Kaminari more self-assured about himself? Iida, you shouting again. Sayu reminded him, to which Iida quickly apologized for. Nah, it's fine guys. Thanks though. Kaminari smiled, returning back to his game. The mood lightened as a few minutes passed by, with all of them exchanging conversation about typical teen things like homework and how this last day had gone by at such a slow pace. Everyone was happy to finally kick back and sit around without the stress of school in sight. After a few minutes, Mina Ishido came down from her room and joined in on the conversation, taking a seat by Sayu. Hey. The pink girl said with a jolly smile. What's up? Nothing much. Sayu replied, turning to Mina. Just talking about the break. Mina let out with a squeal. I'm so happy because it's almost Christmas and I just love it. We can do so many things like. She started to list off winter activities. Building a snowman, make snow angels, going sledding. Or snowboarding. Kaminari suddenly joined in, interrupting her. Yeah. We can do so. Mina halted, not continuing her train of thought. Her eyes widened and she was smiling like a child on Christmas morning. Sue. The enthusiastic alien queen called out. Yeah? Sayu asked, confused by her bizarre cutoff. I've got this great idea. Hey, everyone. Mina stood. Everyone else who had been chatting stopped and directed their attention to their excited classmate. I just had the greatest idea. She looked around, aware that there were only a few of them in the lobby. But first we need everyone here. And with that, Class 1 was gathered to the first floor. This idea that their peppy classmate had came up with would kick off the start to winter break, which would lead into the events that lead up to Christmas Day. What was this idea though? We will surely find out soon enough. Chapter 2. The idea. Class 1. A dormitory, late evening. It had taken an entire hour, but as of now every student from Class 1 were in the lobby, wondering why they had been called down here. Most of them had just been in their rooms or arriving back from school. Once they were gathered, the students decided to chat with each other and wait for the ringleader of all of this, Mina alien Queen Ashido, to arrive, ready to present her self-proclaimed brilliant idea to the anxious teens. What do you think all of us were called here for? Asked Jiro, who was speaking to his unforgettable yet unseeable friend, Toru Hagakure. Do you have any idea, Toru? I have no idea. I heard a knock on my door, and I saw Uraka ask for me to come down here. The transparent girl didn't seem to have an answer. She didn't really specify any details, but when I saw you and everyone else down here, I assumed it was important. Toru lifted her arm and pointed around at all of the students currently in the lobby. Luckily she had been wearing a long sleeve, so Jiro could tell where exactly she was pointing to. I'm guessing no one else really has a clue to what's going on down here either. He took a glance around the room. Everyone seemed to be curious about what was going on. Though I suppose we'll just have to wait. The tailed man said calmly, as he wasn't a man of impatience or lividness. I just hope we don't have to stand around for long. Toru sighed. I'm a little tired. Would you like to sit down with me then? He asked. If you're exhausted we could just sit down over on the couch. Oh really? Toru replied with a stutter. Are you really asking me to sit down with you? Although you couldn't see it, Toru was blushing quite heavily. Sitting next to Ajiro would be to her something that she would wish for Christmas. As long as I get the edge of the couch, my tail becomes uncomfortable sometimes when I sit down. The tail swayed back and forth as a show for emphasis. Oh of course, Hagakure said, overjoyed. The two of them took a seat on the couch. Ajiro let his tail rest over the armrest of the sofa. Someone still hadn't given a reason for being summoned here. He still had been quite curious, as the other students were as well. Over by the wall Fumikage and Kota had been discussing similarly, or more so Tokoyami was the one speaking. You don't know anything about this either? Fumikage asked Kota with a similar curiosity to Ajiro. The silent boy shook his head in response. Well, the Birdman continued. Midoriya is over there with Iida and Shoto. Kota pivoted and stared over at the three of them seated on the couch. The three boys seemed to be discussing something. Perhaps it was the answer to what had been perplexing the well-reserved man. However, he seemed to have an alternative. Sayu is over there with Mina. Perhaps she may know something. He stared across the room where the two of them were also speaking to one another. She was here when I arrived from school, and I think it would be safe to assume that she hadn't gone up to her room. I might find out a thing or two. Suddenly, the two of them stood at the front of the room. Everyone. Mina shouted at the top of her lungs, not trying to do so in a rude manner. The room became quiet. The chatter had ceased and everyone turned, gazing over at Mina. To them it seemed as if there would finally be an answer as to why they had bizarrely been requested to come down to the lounge with no explanation. So, she spoke with her usual peppy tone. You're probably all wondering why I called you down here. Did we end up doing something wrong? Siro called out. No? Mina replied, reassuring Siro with a smile. Of course not. Are you here to announce you'll be dressing up in a sexy Santa outfit? Mineta asked without hesitation. His eyes widened, jaw sank with drool, and he had made a grabbing expression with his hands. This was his way of expressing his perverted fantasies. Is Sayu joining in? Mineta. The great boy felt a sharp pain on the back of his neck. Momoyoi Rozu had struck him in the back of the neck. Behavior like that around us is not only highly inappropriate, but defiles us as women. She turned away from him with a frown of frustration. You earned that one. Shoto looked back, behind the sofa to see the injured peer. He was staring at the floor, rubbing his neck in pain. Anyway. Mina continued on with what she was going to say. Now that we're on break we're free to do a lot with our time. She glanced around at the smiling faces at the desire of sweet relaxation. So. With it being around the time of Christmas, I had an idea that I thought all of us as a class could do together. Fumikage raised his hand. What would that be? Asking for a specification. Are all of you guys ready for this? She looked around the room once more with a giant grin. To her it felt as if it was the climax, the highest point of suspense. Wait for it. Mina announced. Everyone had grown ever so jittery, with the exception of Bakugo. He didn't seem very interested. The perky girl took a deep breath, finally announcing her marvelous idea. Class 1 should set out tomorrow to find a Christmas tree. Mina squealed with excitement as she saw faces in the crowd light up. The Christmas tree, everyone yelled in unison, shocked. We were called down for a Christmas tree. Shadow asked groggily, seeming quite tired. Is that really all we were called down for? Jiro replied. Well, Kaminari said. I don't think it's a bad idea. After all, I guess it'd be pretty cool to make this place look a little more Christmas. Why? He used air quotes to signify his made-up word. I like Mina's idea. Satu chimed in, standing over the two. It's things like this that'll make it feel more like Christmas. Jiro, Tor called. What do you think of this? I'd love to have a Christmas tree, it'd remind me of home. She swayed back and forth, excited. I kind of like the idea myself, he replied, scratching the side of his head with a smile in response to his friend's jolly attitude. A tree. Kota, what do you think of this? Fumikic asked. Kota nodded with a smile, he too seemed to like the thought of getting a Christmas tree. If everyone is heading out, I suppose I wouldn't mind tagging along. Everyone was chatting, nearly everyone had been thrilled about Mina's idea. All of the students had been discussing various subtopics such as the size of the tree, if they were to decorate it, where would they find one, and would they get an authentic or fake tree. It seemed as if all of the students had been so engaged towards these discussions that nothing else came across their mind. No one had been left out of the conversation. Well, all except one student. Yuga Aoyama was standing there by the wall, all alone and no one to speak to. It wasn't that he was purposely left out or anything, he just didn't have many people to talk to. Despite his need to shine in the spotlight, there had been very few times where he truly stood out against his peers. It was first after the USJ attack that took place many months ago that Yuga had realized just what role he had been cast as in the play called Life. He had been outshined by heroes and villains alike. This hurt him on a personal level. It wasn't as if he had an inferiority complex towards everyone. Yuga hadn't had the privilege of growing up like everyone else. Often he wondered why he in fact wasn't like everyone else. This made him feel isolated to the majority of people. The boy shared very little about his personal life, so little to the point where no one knew anything about him. This made people believe that he wasn't much of a people person and wouldn't be willing to share anything, which in turn drove others away from becoming closer with him. Although he never expressed it, Yuga Aoyama was very lonely. Perhaps this was why he felt as if he needed to stand out. If he was in the spotlight, then he felt as if people would look at him, maybe even speak to him. It was why he tried effortlessly to appear flashy or have such a unique character. Most people would be interested in what they normally don't see. If he could have become interesting enough for heads to turn, then there was a chance he could have his wish of being befriended by many. He wished for Christmas that he could be let in without having to force himself. Yuga, a male with a deep voice said. The French boy had awoken from his inner monologue and turned to see who had for once interrupted him. Yuga turned his head and saw a tall student with white hair that covered one of his eyes, sporting a mask around his mouth as well. His most noticeable feature was that he had not 2, but 6 arms. This was Mizo Shoji. You're standing here alone. But of course. Yuga replied with his normal tone, doing a flamboyant pose. I had been merely thinking to myself about a Christmas tree. Right? Shoji said, nodding slowly. Are you heading out tomorrow? He asked, raising an eyebrow. Yuga was silent, thinking to himself. Was he being invited to an event? It seemed that this time he didn't have to intrude. But then again, Mina had invited the entirety of Class 1A, though he wasn't sure who he would spend time and chat with tomorrow. If Shoji was asking him, then he supposed he could end up spending some time with him and anyone else who followed. Besides, he had nothing else to do tomorrow, so even if he didn't hang out with anyone, it was still something to pass the time. Yuga. Shoji called out his name. He waved one of his arms in front of his face. Ah, indeed I will come with, Manami. Yuga smiled with excitement. After all, a Christmas tree for a class with as prestige as this must be a near-perfect tree. He continued with his flamboyant poses. I could not bear to see a shabby tree. I will make sure that their standards are at the utmost highest. Shoji nodded slowly once more. Alright. Well, I suggest you let Mina know before we all head out tomorrow. He took a look over at Yuga. He seemed happy. Before Shoji had walked over, he had noticed that the blonde boy was looking down at the floor, not having such a smile as he usually had. The thing about Mizo Shoji was, despite his seemingly scary appearance, he was quite the friendly person. He never seemed to hesitate to talk to anyone or hold grudges towards those that had wronged him. To him, he felt that the quote appearances can be deceiving was very well true. Indeed I will, Yuga said. It'd be absurd not to do so in the first place. I doubt that they would be able to ascertain such a tree without help from moi. With that, Yuga Aoyama was sure of his duty for the following day. He hadn't been left out, and had personally entrusted himself to find a marvelous tree that was capable of withstanding his high standards. There was little doubt in his mind that he would fail his mission. All of the students had still been chatting when one of them tried to make their way out from the crowd. Hey Kakin. Izuku called out. Where are you going? You are coming tomorrow, right? Deku was headed for the stairs that lead up to the boys' dorms when he stopped to turn around. Why the hell would I? He replied with a frustrated tone, giving Izuku a dirty glare. I don't need to spend my day tomorrow searching for a damn tree with all of you. Saying something such as this wasn't out of character for Bakugo. He was usually a lone wolf who didn't enjoy team playing. He also didn't enjoy spending time with Izuku. He felt that his tendency to care for him was annoying. They had known each other since they were in preschool. Bakugo would always shame and insult the kind boy because of his lacking to having a quirk. It hadn't been Izuku's fault though. He was born without the needs to have one. When Izuku had secretly been bestowed by All Might's power and got into a prestigious school for heroes, this angered Bakugo much more than anything he had ever done. Their rocky relationship nearly always led to arguments and rivalry among one another. Don't you ever get bored with playing the loner role? Shadow asked, seeing Bakugo heading out as well. Shut it, Ice Cube. I don't need to waste my day tomorrow trying to get a stupid tree. He replied, his anger was evident. And what will you do tomorrow? Shadow said, putting him in a corner. Everyone's going to be gone for the majority of the day. Shadow gave Bakugo a dead glare as he found that the explosive boy was being unreasonable and holding out because of his own pride. You'll be all alone with nothing to do. Isn't that more of a waste than at least trying to enjoy your break? I don't need anyone, Bakugo coldly replied. With that he headed up the stairs, not looking back for a second. He had surely been confident with his answer, however the group was uncertain of sincerity and truth in that statement. When it came to being a student he usually excelled without the need of any help. His arrogance didn't lead him anywhere in social situations though, often acting rude and getting furious at little comments made towards him. Nearly anyone who met him would use the words jerk or asshole to describe him. In the end, Kosuke Bakugo was not a people person. Ichako looked over, noticing that Bakugo had left shortly after speaking to the two. What was that about? She asked. Kaken doesn't want to come with us tomorrow. Izuku sighed. He believes that it's a waste of time to come with, that he'd be fine by himself for an entire day doing nothing. Shadow joined in. He was glaring at the set of stairs Bakugo had taken, possibly waiting for him to come to his senses, and realize he's making it worse for himself. This wasn't likely though as Bakugo more often than not stood by his word. If he was going to do something he very well would try his absolute hardest to back up his claims. I don't know why he pushes himself aside all the time. Ichako asked herself. It's not like we're rude to him or anything, in fact he's the only one rude to us. She put her hands on her hips and also stared at the set of stairs he took. I don't know why he gets so angry all the time, especially at Deku. Well, Kaken wants to be number one. Izuku answered. He probably sees me as a roadblock and is angry because my quirk awakened late. He looked down at the floor. It was true that Bakugo had indeed held a grudge over Izuku. Often he would discourage or flat out bully Izuku, however these last few months he seemed to soften a bit. With him finding out about Izuku and All Might he came to realize exactly why the formerly quirkless boy had surpassed him so easily. This made him go a bit easier as just like Izuku, Bakugo highly respected and admired All Might. It's still mean of him to do to you. Ichako changed her view to the now frowning boy. You're so sweet and kind. Izuku looked up at Ichako with now red cheeks. Why you think I'm as sweet? He pointed at himself, stuttering on his words. Did she really mean that? He thought to himself, embarrassed and flushed over her charitable compliment. It was seeing the shy boy's reaction that made Ichako realize what she had said. It sounded like quite a romantic thing to say to him, which in turn made her blush and look away. Why yes. She answered quickly. Her face was as red as a tomato and felt warm. She ran off in fear of what would come next. The brunette had a fear of being rejected as she felt that it would cause a drift between their friendship. She felt that she wouldn't be able to talk to the boy she had feelings for in the same way. This in turn could also mess up how they worked cooperatively during lessons. Showa looked back at how Ichako ran. Is she alright? He then turned to look at his friend who was completely red and mumbling to himself. Better question. Are you alright? He asked, raising an eyebrow at him. Did I say something wrong? No, I don't think so. She's been running from me lately when stuff like this happens. Could she? No. Izuku mumbled to himself. Usually he did that when he was analyzing someone. However, he had different means for analyzing someone, usually to gain an advantage over them in battle, without having to solely rely on his quirk and natural battle instincts. Shadow, did I say something wrong? He looked up at his friend who stared back with a bland expression. No? I don't believe so. He shook his head with disbelief. But, it is quite odd for her to run off like that. I have no idea why. He sighed, believing he had offended her. Shoto saw the disappointment on his friend's face. Although he didn't truly understand why Ichako had run off, he had an idea. If he was right about his hunch, what he could tell the sulking boy could very well cheer him up and out from his small episode of sadness. Izuku, he said. Cheer up. He placed a hand on his friend's back and lightly smiled. I believe I know why she ran away so suddenly. And with that, Izuku stopped frowning and stared with curiosity. He didn't know what Shoto was going to say. He wasn't even sure if what he would say could be a plausible reasoning for his close friend's sudden exit from the conversation. Come with me, it's a little private. The two stood and walked away from the crowd, where they could be alone to speak. Meanwhile, Ichako had run off to where Mina and Sayu were, who were still in fact standing at the front, talking about the Christmas tree. Where would we even get a Christmas tree? Sayu asked. Well, I do know this one place that sees. She halted when she spotted Ichako, who looked visibly stressed, running up towards them. Ichako, she called out, trying to make her stop before she accidentally bumped into either of them. Luckily, Ichako wasn't one to be so clumsy and stopped in her tracks before hurting anyone. Sorry. She quickly apologized, bowing to her friends. I didn't mean to frighten either of you. I just had to get away from something that was bothering me. The nervous girl looked back, not seeing Shadow or Izuku sitting where they had been a moment ago. What was bothering you, Ichako? Sayu asked. She made a ribbit sound after speaking. Well, she replied, trying not to become red. I may have said something a bit embarrassing. Boo. Mina squealed. Something embarrassing? Was it something romantic? Could you say it too? How dare you act? She started pestering Ichako with a bunch of questions. Mina even went as far to shake Ichako out of excitement. Ichako had no reply, as she was quite embarrassed. She looked around the room. Now everyone was staring at her and Mina. She didn't want to draw attention to herself or have people putting two and two together. See, can we go somewhere private? She asked. Oh? Mina said, noticing Ichako was glancing around the room. Everyone was now staring at them with confused faces. If it hadn't been for her interest in romance getting the best of her, they wouldn't have needed to go somewhere private. Sorry about that. Mina said, apologizing to not only Ichako but everyone else. As they walked off, Denki spoke up. Does anyone know what that was about? Those around him shook their heads. I heard something about romance. Momo replied. He came over and joined in on their conversation a while back. Or, at least that is what I apparently heard. Romance. Mineta, who just made himself apparent, asked. Everyone who had been sitting near Kaminari froze up for a second, having not noticed Mineta's presence. Bah. Denki said, looking back behind the couch. Where the hell did you come from? I was behind the couch, following Momo. He pointed up at the tall and overachieving girl. She didn't look very impressed that he had been following her. Momo had never been one to appreciate Mineta's perverted nature. She considered what he did to be a form of sexual harassment, and therefore wasn't fond of him being in her presence, but when he wasn't acting so perverted, she could at least tolerate him being there. Dude. Mineta said. Mina was shaking Ichako over romance. Seems so. Denki looked over at the edge of the couch. Hey Jir. She replied, turning to look at Denki's smiling face. Yeah, what do you think about this? He said, putting his hands behind his head and casually looking over at the punk rock girl, trying to be charming. Whatever it was, Ichako seemed a bit on edge. She said, shrugging her shoulders. Yeah, I know, but do you believe it was about romance? He said with a smile, hoping Jiro would agree as well. It doesn't really matter. She said back, twirling with her ear jacks with a finger. But, if Momo's right then I guess so. The group of them pondered about what had been going on between the three girls. It was a mystery to them about what exactly Mina seemed so excited about, or vice versa, what Ichako seemed so nervous about. Either way, to them it seemed personal if they had to move somewhere private. A few moments later Ida arrived, clearing his throat to get the group's attention. Ahem, excuse me. Yeah, Ida. Satu, who had just been listening, asked Ida, scratching the back of his head. Has anyone seen Shadow or Izuku? Ida questioned, glancing around at the group of students who in turn shook their heads. I was taking a roll call for who would be attending this expedition tomorrow. I was over by Kirishima and Sierra when I had noticed they were gone. He pointed back at the two who were laying their feet on the coffee table. Are you sure you haven't seen them? They could have went back up to their rooms for the night, Momo suggested. It is getting a bit late. Thank you, Momo. Ida bowed in respect and turned, walking off towards the men's staircase. He saw Momo's suggestion as the most plausible, not imagining Shadow or Izuku to be walking around campus during nighttime. After all, they had a strict curfew that stated not to be wandering the school grounds after nighttime under no circumstance. There were obvious exceptions to these rules, however. Emergencies of any kind are to be reported to any staff on duty. He highly doubted that there would have been an emergency that followed up in these last few minutes. If anything, he may have connected their disappearance to the outburst of Mina that occurred earlier. Meanwhile, Shadow had indeed taken Izuku up to the second floor. What Izuku let out with shock, his cheeks became redder than before. He was in disbelief at what Shadow had pitched at him. Girls don't just run away from someone like that. Shadow informed him, leaning on the wall with his arms crossed. While I myself don't know much about love, I can say that it's quite a possibility that she became embarrassed by what she said, because she has a thing for you. As Shadow explained it, his friend became quite flushed. This was something he definitely wanted to hear. He could tell from his clear expression that Izuku had feelings for Ichako as well. If that wasn't the case, then to Shadow there wouldn't be any reason for making such a big deal and reacting like that. Are you sure? Izuku replied, having trouble finding his words. I am almost certain, he assured him. There's no need to worry, she most likely likes you back. After saying that, he watched as his friend's jaw dropped with an alarmed face. Izuku hadn't previously mentioned that he felt that certain way towards his peppy friend. Having this brought up put the love-struck boy in an awkward position. This was the first time he had ever thought of a girl that way. There was so much fear clouding the boy's head, Izuku had no idea what to do in a position like this. Luckily for him, he didn't have to further discuss this. The sounds of footsteps followed up a trail of stairs. Iida had arrived. Shadow, Izuku. He called out their names, walking up to them. I'll need the both of you to tell me if you're planning on. He pausing from his request. He noticed that the two had appeared to have been discussing something before he arrived. Oh. The tall man took an apologetic bow. I am so sorry if I intruded on anything. I humbly beg you to forgive me. Shadow stared down at Iida's unneeded courtesy. A stare was given back at a nervous Izuku, checking how afraid he was at the possibility of his secret getting out. He knew what he had to do and looked back at Iida, who was still taking a bow. Nothing important. He told him, though you can mark us down for heading out tomorrow for the tree, right Izuku? Why yeah. He nervously agreed. It was at this point that Iida stood from his bowing position and nodded. We should probably head to bed a bit earlier than normally, the responsible class rep suggested. We might be trekking around all day, which could make us exhausted, so it's best to get as much rest as possible. The two had no reason to disagree and split, all of them heading to their rooms for an early rest. Indeed, it would have been quite the busy day tomorrow. Over at the girls' side of the building, a similar conversation had happened between the trio. So you won't tell anyone? Achako said, sighing with relief. Nope. It's a secret between us. Saya claimed, reassuring her. Yeah. Mina joined in. I'd hate it if my secrets were revealed to everyone, so don't worry. She-Hulk gave Achako a thumbs up. Thank you. Her smile had finally returned. We should really get some sleep for tomorrow though. I'm pretty tired as well. Sayu acknowledged her passion for a long night of sleep. It had been a long day, with class ending for the holidays and learning something so personal about their classmate. All of them, if not the three of them at least, were getting ready to call it in for the day. The long day was ahead of them tomorrow. But that the last day of class had ended, kicking off the first day of Christmas break tomorrow. It was the start of an unforgettable journey that the students of Class 1 would be pulled into. There were many more events that would lead up to the climax of Christmas Day. One thing was for certain about these days to follow. This 1 week would truly capture the magical essence of winter. Class 1 at dormitory. Men's washroom. GR. Bakugo grumbled as he flossed his teeth. I don't have to go spend tomorrow looking for a stupid tree. Kota, who was right beside the angry Bakugo, took a quick look at how aggressively he was flossing his teeth, hoping not to be caught staring. Unfortunately, Bakugo saw him in the mirror. I saw that. He turned and grabbed Kota by the collar. You got something to say, Rockhead? The silent boy held his hands up and shook his head in fear. Good. He let go, allowing Kota to return to brushing his teeth. However, it was a moment later that Bakugo remembered something important about Kota. He didn't speak. In an instant he threw his hand once more against Kota's plaid pajamas, having a tight grip around his collar. You don't even speak. The explosive boy shouted. I bet you're thinking of something funny about me right now, aren't you? The gentle boy realized that actions weren't going to convince Bakugo. And no. Kota cried. Please don't hurt me. He closed his eyes and braced himself for an attack. It was a surprise to him when Bakugo let go and went back to flossing his teeth. HMPH, he groaned. I'm sorry. For once in his life, Kasuki Bakugo had apologized to someone. No one, not even his closest friends, had ever heard him mutter those 2 words. It must have been some kind of Christmas miracle to have those words coming from someone as bitter as him. If you tell anyone I said that, I'll kill you, understand? Kota nodded, being calmed down from Bakugo's apology. He swore not to tell anyone as he knew an apology from Bakugo was like wishing on a shooting star. After their little incident, the two finished up and headed to bed, finishing the day. Author's note. Sorry for re-upload. I found some critical mistakes as I didn't reread thoroughly. Sorry. I appreciate every single review that I get. Chapter 3 will be coming soon, so no need to worry. Chapter 3 of Bakugo Carol. The Bakugo Carol. It was 10 p.m. when the explosive teen had decided to head to sleep. He exited the washroom after his aggressive session of flossing and continued down the hallway, right up to his room. The door swung open and slammed shut as he entered. He walked forward and fell into his messy bed. The young man didn't even bother to slip under the covers, despite having left his window open where cold air was blowing in. It had been a long day for Bakugo, having to sit through boring classes in anticipation for the break, having to be called down from what he was doing to sit in the lobby, trying to be persuaded by his peers to spend his day tomorrow getting a stupid tree. He didn't care about getting a tree or bond building, those had been the least of his concerns. What he had wanted is to not be caught up in what he considered a waste of time. Anything that had to do with Christmas in fact was a waste of time to him. Whether it be picking out a beautiful tree, sitting with family by a warm fire, or wearing revolting Christmas sweaters, Bakugo didn't want any part of it. He behaved like such a downer whenever it came to Christmas. It was as if he was like Old Man Scrooge, or as Denki suggested earlier, the Grinch who hates Christmas. This wasn't always the case though. When Bakugo was younger he enjoyed taking action in Christmas traditions. He found them exciting. He would love eating Christmas cookies, watching movies about the Christmas hero, Santa. Bakugo was especially fond of waking up on Christmas Eve to receive presents later that day, hoping he had bragging rights over what amazing things his parents would get him. Even in this time of year he still kept his trademark Bakugo pride. He often would wish for big presents, as he felt he deserved them for being cool. To Bakugo, Christmas was a wondrous joy. However, as Bakugo grew he slowly resented Christmas, casting it aside. As he became older his punk and pride became a rebellious attitude. He felt as if he no longer needed to take part in holidays. He spent these last few Christmases with his gang of goons fooling around and making fun for themselves, instead of spending time with his family. He lost his Christmas spirit over time. In short, as well with his needing to appear cool, there were certain events that made the boy more bitter about the blissful holiday. Soon enough would Bakugo go on a journey that would persuade him to reconsider his previous decision of not participating with his class on a field trip. Time passed, young Bakugo was silently sleeping. All through the dorms, not a creature was stirring, not even Koda's rabbit, on this fateful night, with young Bakugo being stricken with bitterness beyond habit. The ghosts of old were sick of the way he was leading his life. They decided to take him on a trip that cold night. The blonde boy had been deep in his sleep. He was so caught up in his dreams that he started to roll across his bed, wandering through the world in his head. At midnight, a specter had infiltrated Bakugo's sleep and warned him to stay wary tonight. It did of no use however, as a land of slumber gave no fright. Soon enough would the rotten boy awaken from a peculiar dream to a mystical odyssey. One that would teach him of Christmas policy. In an hour from midnight would it have begun. Across the room there was mumbling. Bakugo's name was being called out. W-ah. He opened his eyes slowly. He lazily took a glance around the room, trying to focus on where the faint whispers of his name were coming from. W is there. He called out groggily, sitting up. I swear if you're fucking pranking me, Hiroshima. The half-awake boy took a second and more thorough look at his room. He was met with quite a surprise upon further examination. From across his dim room he spotted a short figure who had been creepily standing there, smiling at him with peculiar innocence. Kakin. The figure called out with a childish voice. In a near instant, Bakugo had slipped out of his bed, wearing a face of anger. He knew only one person that called out his name like that. Kakin was a nickname given by Izuku Midoriya when the two were younger. Izuku always addressed him by that and nothing less. Bakugo did not think very well of such a name. He knew this had to be Izuku, though something was different, something he couldn't put his finger on. The now angered boy ran up to the oddly short figure. He stopped in his tracks, making sure not to bump into the annoyance. His hand slowly lit and created an explosion. Bakugo used this as a poor source for light to get a better look at Izuku. Deku, you fucking where? His face of rage turned to shock when he did indeed get a better inspection of the emerald-haired boy. Bakugo slowly backed up in disbelief at what he had just seen. What the hell? There, standing in Bakugo's room was Izuku Midoriya. However, he was not the Izuku that Bakugo knows, or at least had known. He was much shorter than before and looked at least a decade younger. You're not. Before he could finish, the figure interrupted. Izuku Midoriya. They answered, chuckling. The petite child took a step closer to Bakugo. I'll blow your fucking head off if you get closer, short stack. Bakugo threatened with confidence, standing his ground. Kasuki Bakugo, the mysterious child called out. You sure are a quick one to jump down the hostile path. I don't know who the fuck you are or why you look like that asshole, Deku. But I sure as hell know this. I don't appreciate you waking me up while I'm trying to get some damn sleep. The ill-tempered boy raised his voice at the child. This did not seem to intimidate him one bit, which seemed very out of place. I do indeed look like young Izuku to you, do I not? The obscure figure headed over to a writing desk and took a seat in Bakugo's comfy chair. Sit. We have much to discuss. Ordered the Izuku lookalike. Hell no. Bakugo replied. You come into my room, wake me up, and order me to sit down. As established earlier, Bakugo was not one to take orders so lightly. You're lucky you haven't been turned into dust, no name. I am Keiko, answered the inexplicable child. They gave Bakugo a pure smile as the heated boy became confused. Keiko? He asked. Sounds like how you pronounce past in Japanese. Keiko nodded. That is true. Shitty name. Bakugo said, insulting the sneaky child. Well, Keiko rebutted. Bakugo doesn't sound like a hero name. The being let out a youthful snicker. It sounds so basic and lame. Hearing this angered Bakugo, he didn't take insults from others very lightly. Most people who had tried to make fun of the bitter young man ended up with either injuries or complete humiliation. What do you know about names? His hands lit up once more, small explosions were fired up at the ceiling, causing burn damage. You're named after a fucking word. He extended his arm and pointed at the kid who still wasn't intimidated in the slightest. Keiko was not even paying much attention to Bakugo. He was reading Bakugo's alarm clock, staring at the time. It was as if it was the most important thing in the entirety of the world to him. Bakugo, Keiko called out. Would you care to take a look at the clock? Bakugo turned his head and gazed at the digital clock. It read 1 a.m. He became confused as to why he was asked to do such a thing. In fact, he was wondering why he was even listening to the tiny intruder. It says 1 a.m., so what? Bakugo looked back at Koka, who was still glaring at the clock. The boy didn't answer to Bakugo's question. Bakugo became even more annoyed at the fact that he was being ignored. Hey, he called out. I asked you why the hell you want me to look at a clock. It is 1 in the morning, Bakugo. Koka shifted his view to the heated blonde. Time has not passed for quite a few minutes. Great, you show up and now my clock is fucking up on me. He clenched his fists and turned to the clock, ready to strike it. Striking the clock will not fix it, informed Koka. Bakugo slowly lowered his fist and turned his head, glaring down the boy with a look of frustration. It appeared that he had calmed down a bit, perhaps it was because he felt the situation was all too odd. He wanted to find out what was going on. That's how the hell do you know? He crossed his arms. Because it isn't the clock that stopped. That comment made Bakugo raise an eyebrow. Now he was clearly confused. He was unsure of what to make to this situation. He woke up to find a bizarre child who suspiciously looked like Izuku. The child's name is the word past, and his clock, which usually worked fine, was now malfunctioning. It was time. Bakugo halted. His expression changed from enraged to outright shock. He stared at Koka, who was staring back at him with a cheeky smile. Although he found his statement ridiculous, he didn't bother to reply. It was as if Bakugo had believed Koka's words were the truth. He was in quite a bizarre situation. Perhaps it was a dream. It felt all too real to be a dream. Who the hell are you? He asked hesitantly, keeping an eye on the boy. There weren't many things in life that could scare Bakugo. He did not even find himself in fear even in the most life-threatening of situations, such as when he had been kidnapped by the League of Villains. However, this boy who looked like a younger self of a rival that could seemingly stop time, made every nerve in his body freeze, as if he was in extreme cold. As I stated earlier, I am Koka. The boy answered. The ghost of Christmas past. Were you not warned at midnight through your dreams? Silence followed the reveal. To Bakugo this was too absurd to have been a dream. Not only did he not have any knowledge on anything of this Christmas past, but he also hadn't even heard the term up until now. He may have also remembered a dream he had before being awakened. He was indeed warned, but did not want to admit to it. Instead he cast it aside. That is so dumb. The blond boy replied, regaining his punk attitude he had before. Hey. Koka stood from his chair and pointed up at Bakugo, having to look up at him due to his size. That's not a very nice thing to say to someone who's been nothing but nice to you. No wonder we're here to help you get your act together, you punk. So there's even more of you little shits hiding around here, he spun, scanning his room for any other spiritual children. Come on out. Bakugo shouted. Would you stop yelling? Koka hypocritically screamed. Frustrated, Bakugo turned and looked Koka dead in the eyes. He wanted to know what the being's true nature was for being here. Fine. He arrogantly obeyed. But you're going to tell me what in the hell you mean by helping me, and why the fuck time isn't moving. Katsuki Bakugo. Koka stood from the chair and pointed with a serious look. You have foolishly wasted your Christmases by neglecting your family and resenting the true meaning of the holiday. Koka put his legs apart and gave the delinquent an angry glare. For that. We're going to change your heart. Change my heart, he growled. The actual fuck do you mean by that? Look out your window. Koka directed his aim into the snowy cold night. Bakugo complied and did what he was asked to do, only to get this over with. He was shocked to see that he was not looking out onto the UA campus, but it was the street he lived on. Confused, he turned his head to Koka for answers. He'd been even more shocked when he found himself standing in the room at his house, which he had previously lived in before moving into the dorms. Katsuki. A female voice called out. Bakugo recognized it as his mother. He turned to the sound of the voice. What do you want? He shouted back at her. He waited a moment. She didn't answer back. This was abnormal as the two often yelled back at one another. They didn't yell out of hatred towards one another, at least not the majority of times, but because they both were loud people, unlike Bakugo's father, who was much more quiet and calm than the rest of his family. Ugh, coming mom. The sudden shouting of a young boy made Bakugo turn out of instinct. He was a bit surprised to see himself, but much younger. The child set down his action figure of a golden age All Might and opened his closed door, walking out of his bedroom, heading towards his mother. The much older Bakugo followed along with his younger self. The two made it downstairs and headed into the kitchen where their mother was cutting up vegetables. The child walked up next to her and gazed up. His mother turned her head and looked down at the small Bakugo, having now noticed her child had arrived. Bakugo, didn't you hear me calling you? His mother, Mitsuki, asked, seeming a tad bit annoyed. The young Bakugo shook his head, which made the blonde woman rub her forehead in disbelief. I called you 5 times. Keep your door open. She scolded her son, raising her voice slightly. Well, I just didn't hear you. The youthful Bakugo replied, having a bit of aggression in his tone. I was upstairs fighting villains with all might. He crossed his arms and gave a mean look at his mother. Is it time for my present? He asked, quickly changing his expression to look more positive in hopes of receiving it sooner than later. Huh? She was puzzled for a second, but then remembered the key thing about today that had been bothering her. It was Christmas Eve, and she had forgot to purchase a present for her son, as well as her beloved husband. And no, she quickly answered. It's time for dinner. Bakugo turned and walked to the table as his mother readied their plates. Honey. She turned her head and called out to her husband. I don't get this. The current Bakugo face palmed. Why the hell am I here? He frustratingly looked up to the ceiling and shouted. Bakugo wanted an answer from presumably Koka, who was nowhere to be seen. They cannot hear or see you. A familiar voice called out. Bakugo searched for the source of the voice and found Koka, sitting on the counter and taste-testing his mother's cooking with the tip of his finger. Might I say though, your mother is quite the cook, he said with a cheeky smile. I figured that out, shithead. Bakugo pointed at the Time Lord. I was calling out to you so I could get the fuck back to my bed and head back to sleep. No can do. He shook his head. This is a special moment, an important memory, if you will. I don't see anything special about it other than it being Christmas Eve from when I was a kid. Bakugo turned his arm and gestured out to his family that were setting up the table. Tell me why the hell it's so special or I'll blow your fucking head off. I have no belief that you could do that. Koka's smile became much more cocky after that comment, which made Bakugo's anger rise. However, if you must know, why don't we continue watching this together? The petite and peculiar being turned his head towards the dining table. After all, if memory serves me right, I believe this is about to get good. The two turned back to the scene and watched as Bakugo's father, Masaru, walked in from another room. The man looked much younger than he did currently. Unlike his wife, the quirk he had did not cosmetically benefit him. Mitsuki could produce glycerin from her skin, which is why she had the luxury of appearing as though she hadn't aged in over a decade. His father came in with an innocent smile as he looked upon his wonderful family. Hey, honey, Masaru greeted. Let me help out. He reached in to help organize the silverware that had been left out, but his loving wife had other ideas. Just sit down, urged Mitsuki. I don't need help, and besides, it's almost done already. She gave her husband a proud smile, to which he in turn gave her his thankful look. I can't argue with you. He obeyed her request and sat in his chair, smiling at the two people he loved the most. His son took his seat and impatiently started fidgeting with his hands as he waited for his dinner. Masaru's loving wife had the plates of food in her busy hands. Her husband had tried to help her once more, but she refused his offer and set down their meal. The family of 3 started to dig in. So, Mitsuki asked with a bit of food in her mouth. How is work? We're nearing the finishing touches of a new costume for this upcoming hero. Masaru answered. I believe he'll appreciate it. Oh, really? Mitsuki replied. What's this one like? He's a bit loud. Masaru sighed and gave a look of exhaustion, only to have his smile return moments later. But he seems really dedicated to being a hero, so there's that. As I said, I'm confident he'll like his costume. He remind you of someone. The blonde woman tilted her head towards her son, who was eating, implying that she was thinking of Bakugo. Ha, indeed. Masaru snickered, returning to his meal. Mom, Dad, do I get my present after dinner? Bakugo spoke up. His parents exchanged looks of fear, not knowing what to do. Their son could be quite hot-headed and would sometimes even throw tantrums when things didn't go his way. A night like this wasn't one they wanted to be ruined. It was quiet and calm. The child stared at the both of them, uncertain as to why he hadn't gotten his present yet. Well, you see, son. His father nervously answered, not wanting to make his son upset. Santa hasn't dropped it off yet. Why is he taking so long? He replied. Santa is always on time. Maybe he's just a bit late. His father told his son in a calm voice, hoping Bakugo wouldn't shout or enter one of his anger episodes. The ill-tempered child lowered his eyebrows and gave a stern look of disappointment. HMPH, he crossed his arms. I want it now. Just wait a few days. His mother chimed in. He probably just forgot. Forgot? Bakugo raised his voice. How the fuck could he have forgotten me? Katsuki. Mitsuki yelled. Where did you learn that word? Nowhere. He shouted back, clearly lying. I just want my presents. Masaru stood up, gulping. Hey. Let's not fight, shall we? He nervously smiled after attempting to calm down the both of them. He didn't like his son's crude behavior, but to him, this wasn't anything to get into an argument about. I don't care. Bakugo turned away from his parents in his seat. How does Santa forget me? That's bull. Katsuki, go to your room. Ordered his mother. Now. Fine. He slipped out of his chair and walked out of the dining room. If Santa forgets me, then I don't care about Christmas. The angry child stormed up to his room, slamming the door. Koka, who had witnessed it all with the present Bakugo, frowned. That was rather harsh. The Time Lord gazed over at the blonde teen who, like his child's self, had turned away and crossed his arms. So? He replied. If you were told that some fat guy who gives presents to every kid somehow forgot you, then you'd be fed up with a bullshit story like that. Bakugo shook his head. Are we done here? He asked, frustration in his voice. You bring up one shitty memory, so what? I'm still not having a fucking change of heart, and I'm still not getting a fucking tree with those losers either. Bakugo, Koka watched him. We're not done yet. The tiny being slipped off of the counter and waddled over. There's one more memory you have to see, where I believe it all truly started. Ugh, this is annoying. Bakugo closed his eyes for a second. He opened them to find himself staring at a park. There were 4 kids there. His younger self, a child with a buzz cut and wings that sprouted out of his back, a snotty kid who had long fingers, and Izuku Midoriya, who he almost mistook for Koka. Where the hell am I now? The tired and annoyed boy shouted out. You should refrain from shouting, it hurts my ears, Bakugo. Koka said, appearing out of seemingly nowhere again. Why the actual fuck won't you let me sleep? Bakugo replied, getting up and clothes with the calm deity. You keep pissing me off more with every second of this bullshit. We're almost done here, watch the scene just as you did earlier, please. Answered the miniature Christmas spirit. As much as it pained him, Bakugo quit complaining and observed the scene. The much younger version of him was sitting on a snow-covered bench, his goons placed beside him while Izuku stood. I can't believe this shit, little Bakugo started to rant, only to be cut off immediately by the green-haired boy. Kakin. He called out. You shouldn't be using those words. Shut up. The clearly angry child responded. I'll talk how I want to talk, you stupid baby. Yeah. One of his goons joined in. Anyway, I can't believe that Santa forgot me. Bakugo bitterly expressed. It's nothing but a load of bullshit. That wasn't nice of him. Izuku interrupted his rant once more. Even if you are a little mean, you should still get your present like everyone else. I'm not mean. He claimed loudly. Izuku took a step back and frowned. He knew Bakugo was clearly upset, but wouldn't admit it. Do you want my present? Young Izuku held out a brand new Silver Age All Might figure that he had brought with him to show. This figure had only been on the market for a few weeks and sold out very fast, especially around Christmas time. In truth, Bakugo had been hoping to receive this figure, but hated to obtain it like this. The blonde boy shook his head and crossed his arms. No. He coldly rejected the offer. I don't need your dumb toy. The angry boy held out his arm and pointed at the generous boy. I sure as hell don't want or need your help either. Oh, okay. Saddened, Izuku looked to the snowy ground and stared at his All Might figure. Besides, I'm going to kick Santa's ass if I don't have my present by tomorrow, right guys? The confident smile that had a dark undertone took place upon Bakugo's face. There was silence from the two of them. Why are you two being so quiet for? He shouted, confused. Is something funny? Well, no. The winged boy answered nervously. It's just that. At what Bakugo shouted, he was anxious for an answer. Santa isn't real, answered the other boy. Bakugo's eyes widened as he heard this. Izuku, as well, looked up with surprise and disbelief. The clearly shocked boys stayed silent for a few minutes. They could not believe what those two had just said. Santa isn't real. To them that was like claiming that the sun wasn't real or that ice cream was poisonous. All of those statements sounded like complete lies. Bakugo. The same boy called his name. If this was true, Bakugo couldn't just argue that Santa was real. He imagined his buddies laughing at him for believing in Santa. His existence was now put into question. I knew that. Bakugo put on an act, giving off a poor impression that what he had been ranting about had nothing to do with this now fictitious Santa Clauses. But you were mad because Santa didn't get you anything for Christmas? The winged boy curiously questioned. PFFT, yeah. I only said that because we have a baby with us. The heartbroken kid wore a fake smile, looking away from Izuku, who was now in tears. Who's the baby? Asked the dumbfounded boy with wings. The bratty child with long fingers stretched out his hand and slapped the winged imbecile upside the head. It was after the painful attack that the kid pieced the puzzles together and stared at Izuku. Oh, he said, finding his answer. Santa is real. Izuku cried, shivering. His hands became shaky as he gripped tight on his brand new toy. The tears flew like a river, despite the sorrowing lad's attempt at holding them back. Suddenly, he turned and ran off. The insulting looks of the bullies was too much for him to take. He wanted to run home to his room and sulk, alone. Izuku didn't want to believe his sweet and caring mother had lied and made up some fairy tale to look forward to. After all, he knew the harsh reality of what was fiction and what wasn't, but this was something he just wanted to believe was real. The scene froze after Izuku had left their line of sight. Koka turned his head and looked up at Bakugo, who was turned away from the scene. His expression was one of disappointment, not at anyone else, but himself. That was quite mean of you to do. You really hurt his feelings, Bakugo, Koka said, rather sadly. Who cares? He coldly replied. It was years ago, I'm sure he's over it. He may be over it now, but he wasn't then. Koka gave Bakugo a sharp stare. You have to realize that your actions have consequences. Shut up. Bakugo had his back to Koka. I want to head back to my bed, this shit is annoying. Koka sighed, perhaps he wasn't getting through to Bakugo at all. This wasn't the case though, Bakugo did feel something deep down in his heart. He felt regret. Maybe he was just now realizing how right he was. He did ruin someone's Christmas day after all, even if he wasn't in the right mind. If you wish. Koka obeyed his request. Bakugo shut his eyes for another moment, only to wake up and find himself in his cold room. He was laying in his rather comfortable bed like he was before, but he had a hard time trying to fall asleep once he returned. It was a rather odd dream he had. Bakugo wondered why of all times of now did he have one like this. To him this was nothing more than a nightmare to keep him up at night, having idiotic thoughts about his life when he could be sleeping. Still, the dream felt quite real to him. When he was reliving the memory of Christmas Day out in the park, he could feel just how cold it was, but maybe that was just because he left the window open before he went to sleep. The cold air might have affected his lucid slumber. He rolled on his side, checking the clock. After all, he had no idea what time it was when he woke up. It read 2 o'clock, meaning it was 2 a.m. Oddly enough, his clock had struck 1 a.m. during his dream. However, only 4 hours had passed since he went to bed. Bakugo jokingly stared at the clock for a few moments, waiting to see if time stopped once again. A bit of disappointment fell when it became 2:01 a.m. Ha, bullshit. Bakugo snickered and rolled on his other side, facing the wall. To him it really did just seem like a dream. He stared at his blank wall, there was difficulty in trying to sleep. It was the very real dream in the back of his head that kept Bakugo up during the night. It felt as if he had perfect control in using all of his senses, which obviously was a very rare or even impossible task to do while you're unconscious. To him all that truly mattered though was that he was free to have more pleasuring dreams as he drifted to sleep. Unfortunately, things would not go his way. It was when Bakugo finally cast aside the dream and tried to close his eyes that he was met with another surprise. The wall he was facing grew darker. At first, he thought the shining moon had been covered by the clouds, but it was only when he realized the darkness took a shape that he became more anxious. He felt a hand grip tightly to his shoulder, almost shouting for help. But before he could, he was turned by force to see a very familiar face. In fact, it was his face. Who the hell are you? He let out to the figure wearing his face. The complete clone of him smiled and chuckled. I am you, he answered. Or at least I look like you. The mirror image of Bakugo let go and stood back from his bed, having his arms crossed and giving his now startled twin a smug grin. Well, aren't you going to shout at me or something? Why the hell do you look like me? Bakugo loudly questioned. What the hell is happening, and where did you come from? He sat up and activated his quirk, just like he had with Koka. The size of the uncontrolled explosion led to scarring his ceiling from the burn. It was at this time that Bakugo was truly furious. Quiet, I am not like Koka. The second Bakugo rudely replied. Now, I'll gladly answer the question you asked when I startled you. I wasn't startled. Bakugo defended, clenching his fist in anger. What the hell do you mean by not like Koka, too? I am Gensai. The now-named young man took a stage bow. I am the ghost of Christmas current. Bakugo's frustration was expressed through a loud and drawn-out groan. Another one, he yelled out. Why don't you all just fuck off already? Because your heart hasn't changed yet. Gensai's cocky grin didn't look abnormal on Bakugo as most of his smiles appeared like that, but none looked quite as playful as this one, which ironically enough could unsettle someone if they were to mistake him for Bakugo. After all, as we all know, Bakugo doesn't play very well with others. On closer inspection, Gensai's overall posture and appearance did differentiate from how Bakugo would normally be, despite the signature grin which was still slightly off. It isn't going to change. Piss off, he ordered. Gensai wasn't going to take no as an answer though. We can do this all night. Trust me, you wouldn't want to do that. Bakugo stood up and eyed Gensai, sporting a furious look that screamed of hurt pride. Don't think you're anything worthwhile. He lifted his hand and pointed at the arrogant spirit. I'll crush you like I have everyone else who's talked shit and threatened me. That attitude of yours is why people think you're a prick. That conceited comment made Bakugo even angrier at his doppelganger. If you won't leave me the fuck alone, then hurry up and show me this shit already. The furious and annoyed young man shouted. Gensai continued to smile as he lifted his hand and snapped his fingers. Bakugo felt an odd surge of energy flow through him. It was unnatural and didn't feel like anything he'd ever experienced before. First stop, you friends. Gensai said, hovering into the air. Hey, where are you going? Bakugo jumped in an attempt to grab a hold of him, but he was surprised when his feet didn't hit the floor. It was as if gravity had no effect on him. At first he thought that the gravity girl, Achako, was behind this, but he quickly remembered that Gensai had snapped and fueled him with mysterious energy. He now understood that it was him who had done this. Bakugo looked up only to be met with yet another surprise tonight. Genzai had phased right through the ceiling and into another room entirely. Bakugo activated his quirk which propelled him upwards towards where Genzai had gone. He didn't mind using his quirk, despite the possible threat of setting his room on fire. As he skyrocketed upwards he as well just like Genzai had phased right through the ceiling and into Shado's room. It had a Japanese style, almost resembling the inside of a stereotypical dojo. There stood Genzai, creepily watching Shadow while he slept. If you brought me here to watch Ice Boy sleep, then you can just hurry up and shoot me, because not only am I not his friend, but I sure as hell don't want to watch him sleep. Oh, he is sleeping? Genzai unprofessionally asked. Well, he won't be of any use. The spirit turned and started to walk right. Hey, I've got a question for you. Bakugo asked, crossing his arms. How the hell can I move through walls as well as float? Genzai sighed and turned. For someone as smart as you I thought you would have been able to figure this one out just like the rest. He face-palmed. Please tell me that you figured it out and you're just double-checking. Hey, shut up. I already know it's you, you dick. Bakugo annoyingly shouted. I just want to know how, is it your quirk? I do not have a quirk. Genzai's answer came as a surprise. As for how you're able to float and pass through walls, I put you into an astral form. Meaning as of now you're a spirit, but don't fret, you're not dead. Huh? What do you mean by spirit? I got my he looked down only to realize he had no legs, but a ghostly tail. Also, you're not floating. It's called flying, but since you're such a newbie you can't even properly control where the hell you're going. The spirit started to laugh at the rookie beside him. I forgot to mention, you can shout all you'd like now. No one can hear or interact with you, just like how they couldn't in the past. Genzai continued strolling through the room, heading towards the wall. Doesn't explain why the hell you have legs and I don't. Well, it's simple, Bakugo. I'm much more trained so I can materialize my legs, but I am only creating the illusion that I am walking. In truth I am just hovering in place and using my legs. Well, if I don't have legs then how the hell did I jump after you? He questioned. It must have taken a moment for you to transform, hence why you still had your legs for a moment, and why you were able to, as you said, leap after me. Genzai said, still having that smug smile on his face. Oh, and before you ask, well your quirk in this form may not affect the outside world, it will affect you, which is the reasoning for your ability to propel yourself, just as you did to get to me. Know it all. Prick. What was that? Bakugo shouted at the spirit, but before he could get an answer he passed through the wall. Since he wasn't trained in flying he once again decided to propel himself. Putting his hands behind his back he activated his quirk, sending himself flying at a high speed. He went right through the wall, but he didn't stop. Bakugo almost went through the next wall, but luckily Genzai was able to grab a hold of him before doing so. Careful there. The spirit cheekily warned Bakugo. Shut up. And why the hell are we here? He looked around the room. It seemed like a pretty bland room, but one thing happened to stand out. Whoever owned this room seemed to be a baker, as there were various tools used for cooking that had been set down beside a giant microwave. The pair of them glanced around the room in search of anything that would determine whose room they were floating in. Their search didn't last long as they noticed the bed in the dimly lit room. There was a tall young man with spiked hair sleeping under a blanket that had sugar written all over. Satyu's room was the clear answer for where the duo had been. I'm guessing we're not in the room of one of your friends. Genzai sighed. I am horrible with directions. He stood there for a moment, a bit disappointed in how unprofessional he was being. Well, hold on. He grabbed a hold of Bakugo's arm. Hey, what the hell are you doing? He shouted, unsure of what his duplicate was doing. It'll be easier if you shut up and just let me drag you. Before Bakugo had the chance to rebuttal he was dragged down into the floor by Genzai. The two entered a dark room that was only lit by one light. Bakugo already knew whose room this was surprisingly, as it was right beside his own. This was Kirishima's room. Hopefully I got this one right. Genzai said to himself. If I'm right then this is Kirishima's room. If you know where his room is then how the hell did you mess up the other ones? Bakugo asked, confused. This is just off of pure memory, asshole. The spirit crossed his arms. I didn't memorize the layout hard enough and screwed up my entire presentation. Yeah. We're in Kirishima's room, now what? I don't believe your friends are quite happy with your attitude, Bakugo. Lifting his arm, he pointed at Kirishima who was half awake and texting on his phone. Curiosity filled his head. He knew his friends didn't always agree to his behavior, but were they as upset as Genzai had laid on? Using his quirk, Bakugo used a light explosion to propel himself towards Kirishima, who had a look of disappointment on his face. The young man decided to snoop on who his friend had been texting, only to be surprised when he read a conversation that was going on in a group chat compiled of everyone he hung out with. Chargeable, dude. Bakugo is being such a mood killer. Pinky, oog. Why the hell doesn't he just come with us and stop being such a baby? Has making it worse for himself. Cellophane I get that he does like hanging out with people, but does he have to be a jerk when some people just wanna enjoy Christmas? Right, I don't know guys. Maybe he will come around. He probably had a bad day or something. Chargeable, yeah, but what if he's like this all winter break? I don't really want to hang around someone who don't want to do anything with us. Pinky, yeah, if he keeps shutting us out, how are we supposed to hang out with him? I think Hess gonna be a big Grinch to us. I want to try and convince him, but Hess hard to get through. Cellophane, I think he'll yell at us if we try to help him. Pinky, maybe we should make him angrier and just leave him alone. Chargeable, what if we just waste our time? If Hess all angry, we should let him cool down and just go have fun. If he gets angry for not coming with, then it's his fault for being pretty stubborn. Red, right, but guys, Bakugo is our friend. We can't just let the guy sulk alone 24/7. Even if he yells at us, should we at least try to help him? Pinky, I guess you're right. Pinky, I got an idea. How about we try in the morning, and if that doesn't work, we just go without him. That way both sides can be happy. Red, right, I'm all for it. I think we might be able to convince him to come with. How about you guys? Cellophone, sure. He'll come with. But I don't think this is gonna work. Chargeable, I guess we can try, but if it doesn't work, then we all head out without him, okay? Red, right, alright. Pinky agreed. Cellophone, yeah. Bakugo backed away from Kirishima and looked down, looking disappointed. Now do you feel like a douche? Genzai asked. Not only are they fed up with your attitude, but you've only got one friend who's trying to get everyone to give you a second chance, because they feel horrible about the thought of you being lonely. Like I should care about how bad they'll feel about me. Bakugo turned, facing away from them. I don't need to hang out with them to be happy. I'm fine by myself. The tone of his voice practically screamed I am not okay. But Bakugo didn't want to admit he might not be fine all alone. I don't care if these guys get all bitchy with me either. Those fuckers can be jerks about my decision to be alone and screw off. Bakugo, it's not too late to quit being an asshole and let people in. Listen. I do not want to go on a stupid trip with them tomorrow, so they can forget about my second chance because it's not happening. Wow, I can't believe even after all of this you're still not having a change of heart. After exploring the deep roots of why you resented Christmas. Having your friends get upset at you only to then show a bit of mercy, and instead of leaving you alone, they at least try to convince you because of how much they care, and you can't even change your damn mind. Genzai looked disappointed, shaking his head. You're not going to have a change of heart, Bakugo. It doesn't matter how many bad memories you turn away from or how many people you choose to push aside, you just won't man up and change. I just want to sleep. Bakugo coldly replied. Well, you can sleep now. Goodbye, Bakugo. Suddenly, Bakugo was flung through the wall and straight back into his bed. He no longer was in his astral form. He lay there in the cold, thinking about everything. He begrudged Christmas because of a childhood dream being crushed for the price of looking cool to those around him. The choice he made to no longer engage in the holiday for a false sense of maturity is what led him to deny what most likely could have been a fun experience. For once, Bakugo had felt completely wrong about the decisions he had made. He didn't know what to do next. Perhaps he was finally starting to have a change of heart, but where would he start after his heart had been altered? He rolled on his side and stared at the clock. It read 3 o'clock, another hour had passed. Was it another dream? He thought to himself. Before he could go in depth about it, a hand wrapped itself around Bakugo's neck. He was lifted out of his bed and into the air. His eyes followed down the gray and bony hand that had such a tight grip around him. The trail led to a terrifying figure who was holding his side. Bakugo, it's time. The hooded figure said with a laugh. Tea time for what? He said, struggling to catch his breath. The figure pointed downwards. Bakugo saw that below him was a spiraling wormhole. He admittedly became quite anxious as for him this might have been the end of the line, if he guessed correctly as to who stood before him. Without answering, the figure dropped him in. Bakugo tried to propel himself out of the hole by using his quirk, but it was of no use. Falling through, Bakugo felt as if his life was flashing before his eyes. Glimpses of the future were drilled into his head. The first one he had seen was everyone of one gathered around the lobby, enjoying their holiday while Bakugo silently sulked upstairs in his room, being very bitter. He sat in his room as he watched the snow fall silently. His face was not one of happiness, but of sadness. The next scene was more depressing than the first, cutting to a scene of an adult Bakugo sitting at a desk in an unfamiliar house. He was looking through his letters in hopes of receiving one from one of his friends, but none were found. Those around him believed Bakugo did not care for Christmas and didn't bother. Before he could get a closer look, the scene changed to a snowy street. Houses were all lined up with one another, each decorated with various bright lights. People gathered for parties and smiled, laughed, as well as cheered. There was one exception, however. At the end of the street was a dark house that seemingly had no one inside. Upon further inspection, though, you could see a much older Katsuki Bakugo, sitting there in a rocking chair and watching television. He still had that same look on his face as in the previous scene. The boy of the present did not know what to think of what he had seen. Was this truly his future? Could it be that holidays like Christmas, where everyone would gather to rejoice, had such an impact on those who preferred hostility instead of happiness? Suddenly, Bakugo fell out of the wormhole and hit his room's floor. The figure, who was still there, looked over him. Did you enjoy the show? He deeply spoke. I know I did. Screw you. Bakugo let out. That isn't my future if that's what you're thinking. Oh, but it is. The hooded figure corrected. There's no way Christmas can affect a life that much. Bakugo slowly stood, staring straight at the hooded man with pure raw anger. I don't believe that shit. Perhaps not, but allow me to remind you that the path you are going down will eventually lead to that life. The hooded figure claimed while laughing at the teen. Being lonely for that long, imagine Christmas Eve with no one to party with, no one to celebrate it with, no one there for you. Hell, no. I don't want to be cooped up in some shitty place by myself. Especially not on Christmas. Then regain your Christmas spirit and enjoy the holiday once again. It's a time of happiness and being together, Bakugo. Do not drive the people you love away from you at times like this. It'll hurt not only them, but yourself. Fine. I'll regain my spirit. Bakugo calmed down. I'll admit I was a jerk. It's really fucking rude to blow off friends who just want to hang out with you. Even shittier to be a dick to people who just want to enjoy the damn holiday. Will you end up lonely and bitter? Hell no. Bakugo yelled with confidence. If that's my future, then it can kiss my ass. Very well. The hooded figure nodded and placed a hand over Bakugo's face. He felt his vitality being drained to the point where he found it hard to stay awake. Within seconds, Bakugo collapsed and remained unconscious for the rest of the night. It had taken a while, but it was done. Kosuke Bakugo had reclaimed his Christmas spirit and changed his heart. December 19th, morning. Bakugo slowly woke to the sounds of footsteps in the hall. He rubbed his tired eyes and hesitantly checked the clock. It was finally morning. The boy stood and stretched after having a long night. Was it all some sick dream? He thought to himself as he changed into his winter apparel. It felt too real to have been a dream, but to him there was no way that he could have actually spoke to Christmas spirits and have his future predetermined to automatically make him miserable over not only the holidays, but of every day. He slipped on his coat and opened his door, surprisingly not seeing his group of friends gathered around his door. He smiled. It truly was just some dream. Although his journey had been fictitious, he still felt compelled to tag along with the rest of his class. There had been some fine points being made from his dream. Even if he didn't admit it, the thought of being alone in his room alone while everyone else was out having fun was a shitty way to spend a well-earned winter break. He walked through the hallway and down the stairs to the lobby. There he saw everyone readying up for a long day out in the snow. A few people turned to see that Bakugo was dressed up, but he for once didn't mind the looks he got as he walked up to his group of friends. Mina, who had just spotted, waved and shouted his name. Bakugo. The pink girl yelled. Look at who finally decided to come after all. Nudging Kirishima, he turned happily to see his pal had changed his mind. Aw, hey man. Kirishima patted him on the shoulder as he approached the circle of friends. You had a change of heart, didn't you? Bakugo shrugged and gave Kirishima a relieved smile. Like I would actually sit up in my shitty room by myself. Whoa, dude. Denki said as he noticed Bakugo's smile. You sure seem happy. Had a nice dream, telephone wire. Bakugo replied, slightly insulting Denki with the name. The pack of friends laughed, even Denki, who had been the one insulted. I gotta go tell Engine Legs that I decided to come with. I'll be back. Bakugo turned and walked off, leaving the four of them to talk. Hey, weren't we supposed to go try to convince Bakugo to come with us? Zero asked. Kirishima shook his head in reply. Nah, man. I told you all he would come to his senses and join us. As much as the hot-headed blonde wouldn't like to admit, he was happy that the future he saw in his dream may not have been the truth. He felt glad that he wasn't met with any snarky comments about his attitude yesterday, and met with hostile questions about why he decided to change his mind. Instead, he was only met with relieved and overjoyed faces of his friends. As Bakugo walked up to the front to speak with Iida, he caught Izuku's attention. Kakin. Izuku called out, expecting to be shouted at. What? Bakugo calmly said. You decided to join us after all? He asked. Would have been boring if I just stayed up in my room all break. After he replied, he went up to Iida and stated that he was in fact tagging along, to which Iida gladly checked him off on his list. After doing so, Iida walked to the front and shouted. May I have everyone's attention? The room fell silent as the floor was all Iida's. As of now, we are confirmed that everyone is in fact joining in. Remember to follow the rules and guidelines we use on school trips, so we don't fall short or lose anyone. Everyone seemed a little unenthusiastic when he mentioned to follow rules. I have but one question for everyone. Iida smirked and pushed up his glasses. Are you ready to venture out for a Christmas tree? The crowd went wild after that. And so here concludes the Carol of Bakugo. We not only learned more about Bakugo through his past, but along the way saw him mature as he realized how he made others feel with his resentment of enjoyment, albeit the problem was fixed. The falling out of a future that held no lies nor exact truths was changed through the denial of allowing predetermination by Christmas spirits. We've seen it all, but one thing matters the most. Bakugo was no longer the Grinch of Christmas. Chapter 4 The Snowy Journey. A class of future heroes were now all set to venture out into the freezing wonderland. They started off their journey by strolling down the pathway of their campus. Trekking through the school ground proved to be a bit rougher than they expected, however. Just as Ida had predicted the previous day, the level of snow had elevated, making the walk more difficult than it had needed to be. On their way down to the entrance gates, the group had spotted quite a few maintenance workers. They all seemed to be hard at work and shoveling the mountainous piles of snow out from the pavement and onto the field. Wow. Sayu said as she observed them diligently work. That's a lot of workers. UA seems to take winter quite seriously, Fumikich added in. Clearing the snow appears to be a top priority here. One after another, piles of snow were hauled out from the paths and out onto the fields. The workers didn't seem to be taking any sort of break, which wasn't abnormal per se, but their movements seemed so robotic-like, as if they were perfectly choreographed without fail. To top it all off, the workers were all wearing jackets that sported UA on the back. Not only that, but they were all the exact same light blue jacket with giant fur hoods, covering up the identities of these people. Perhaps too seriously, continued Fumikich, now noticing how strange this was. Do you believe we should try to get their attention? Shoji, who was next to them, joined in. We should probably tell them happy holidays, Sayu suggested. She cuffed her hands together and shouted, "Hey, happy holidays." The workers didn't stop, as if they were not able to hear her at all. The frog girl turned to her two classmates, which shrugged. Was I loud enough? She asked. I could hear you loud and clearly, Fumikich said. Do you think walking up to them would be a good idea? Sayu asked her group, placing a finger on her face and sticking her tongue out. Before any of them could respond to her question, a voice from afar called out to them. Asui and the others, you're all lagging behind. The bunch of them turned to see Ida yelling towards them, halfway across the pathway with the others. They realized the separation and caught up to the other students, apologizing to Ida for halting to gaze off elsewhere. Ida crossed his arms and looked at them with confusion, turning his head to glance over at where the group had been so fixated on. What were you all doing standing over there? Was something distracting or worrying all of you? Just wishing the workers a happy holiday, but I don't think they heard us, Sayu said, looking back at the hooded figures who were still working. Ida followed Sayu's eyes and spotted the workers. Then, he smiled, which became a chuckle that then evolved into full-on laughter. They stared at him, confused. Was Ida laughing at something they had done or said? All of them thought back as to what they could have done that prompted him to break out into this laughing fit. After a while, Ida ceased his laughter and smiled once more. Don't worry about them, he reassured. They're real people. The school uses robots for our janitorial services. The students, all of them, with the exception of Momo, were taken aback by this fact. The workers halted their work, every last one of them turned in unison. They walked in lines to the next area of work. From the angle the students were at, a front view of these workers was viewable. It was only then that the steel faces with glowing glass eyes could be seen. The robotic workers marched away, out of the class's view, off to shovel snow elsewhere. Wait, Sayu asked. If they're robots, why do they need to be wearing jackets? That I sadly do not know of, but I can think of a few reasons for why. Ida answered, rubbing his chin. Perhaps it's to identify any robots that wander off. He continued to think about that question. Why did a robot wear a jacket? It was a strange question to ask, but he thought an answer would be even stranger. I believe it might be to go along with this whole Christmas aesthetic, Tsu. Momo, who was listening in, added. Ida nodded, agreeing with her statement. Either way, we should continue. After all, we don't want to miss the bus, Ida said, walking up to the front. He gestured for the students to resume the walk. Mina, who was near the back of the crowd, was called up to the front once they reached the gates of their school. She came up and met with who was calling her. Not surprisingly, it was Ida and Momo, who had just been done a roll call of everyone. Yep, she asked with a perky smile. Mina, you know where this place is, right? Momo asked. Mina nodded. Of course, she said, giving a thumbs up and winking. I've been going there since I was just a little kid. Would you mind leading the way? The class president requested. None of us have ever been to this place besides you, so it'd be best if you were to guide us from here on out. Leave it to me, she said, trotting away. She turned her head before she got too far from the crowd. This way. The alien queen pointed. And so, Class 1A followed along with her, Ida and Momo straight behind her. Momo kept looking back to make sure everyone was still with them, not wanting to leave anyone behind or lose them on the way. Although it'd be quite difficult to get separated from a crowd this big, Momo had to double-check as Ida and her were responsible for the safety of their friends. After a while, Mina stopped at a bus stop. She was waiting for everyone to catch up. Are we stopping here to get on the bus? Ida asked, checking the sign laid out in front of him. It read 14 and was the assumed number of the bus. Yep, Mina said, taking a seat on the bench. This'll take us down to the train station and we can get on one of them to get out of the city and take us right to where we're going. She sounded pretty confident in her answer, so there wasn't any reason to have doubt, at least for now. It's quite useful to know your way around, Momo added in with a smile. She turned and called out to everyone. Everyone. The students, who were chatting among one another, stopped and faced their vice president. She had a serious look on her face. The students knew she was most likely going to announce something important. As of currently, we'll be waiting a few minutes until our bus arrives. We will get on and get off once it reaches the train station. Mina will then guide us through on which train to take. Does everyone have their bus pass? The students nodded. That's good. How about your rail pass? Once again, they nodded. Momo was relieved as it meant no one would have to pay or borrow money for their transportation. Everyone waited for the bus, a few standing around and chatting, while others took the liberty to take a seat by the road. Kirishima, who was standing about, decided to walk over and sit beside Mina. She turned her head and noticed her friend. She greeted him with a perky smile. Hey. Yo. What's up? The red-haired boy asked, enthusiastic as always. Sitting on a bench. She responded, swaying side from side playfully. Her friend watched her and smiled at the simple response. The pink girl noticed that her joke had an effect and giggled. Kirishima rested his arm, hauling some snow off. Man, there's so much snow here. He exclaimed, it's really cold. Mina, who had a front row view of this, could not keep her laughter in. Kirishima turned his head and saw her laughing, but he didn't pay mind. He wasn't very fond of the cold, though he did think he overreacted. Sorry, wasn't cool of me, he said, apologizing and laying back on the snow-filled bench. His face had a slight look of disappointment. Haha, lighten up a little, won't you? Mina requested, punching her friend lightly. Not everyone's crazy about how cold it is out here. The friendly attack made her gloom friend cheer up surprisingly enough. Kirishima was what you could consider the stereotype of a man, though he embraced this. Reason being was because he'd always wanted to live up to the ideal image of what society believed a man to be. Heroes like Crimson Riot and All Might were role models to him, people he wanted to be like. He liked how strong and tough they were, so he followed their image and mimicked them. In short, it's why things like punches to the arm or being a little rough at times with one another didn't bother him. You're right, Kirishima said, grinning to show his sharp teeth. He raised his fist high into the air and yelled out, a man doesn't get upset over something as simple as that, right Mina, and besides, I'm a man, so this weather should be nothing. Mina stood and raised her arms, cheering on her friend with a battle cry. Yeah. She let out. A few students turned and gave the duo some looks, some wondering what could have been going on between the two. Denki, who was standing next to Jiro, decided to take this as a chance to speak to her while waiting for the bus. Hey Jiro, he turned his head and called out. Jiro turned and raised an eyebrow. You ever wonder what goes on between those two? Not really, but I don't really see why you'd care. She responded, twirling her earphone jack. Denki tried to play off the failure of conversation with a smug and cool attitude. A little suspicious they've been around each other a lot lately, isn't that weird? He asked in hopes of getting Jiro's attention. They did know each other before high school. The punk girl said with no enthusiasm. Denki's eyes widened and he turned his head, giving a smug grin over at Kirishima, who was still chatting with his pink and perky pal. You know, Kirishima never told me that, he said, turning back to Jiro in hopes of having her catch his drift. Unfortunately, she didn't and shrugged. Denki sighed, feeling defeated. Depends on how well you know him, Jiro said, turning her head to see Denki's face, noticing his disappointment. She sighed, not wanting to see him look that down. I guess it is kind of weird though if you two are that close. Denki's spirits lifted after hearing Jiro agree with him. His cheeks went a little red and he smiled, giving her his traditional cool expression. The girl with the amethyst hair saw his charming smirk and oddly enough, smiled back. She didn't smile for long though as she felt her cheeks become a warm red, she was blushing. Pulling up her scarf, she turned away and pocketed her hands, looking down at the icy ground. Before the electric boy could tell that he took notice and compliment her smile, the bus pulled up. Everyone, follow Momo and I in an orderly fashion, shouted Iida. The students did as they were told and scrambled together, stepping in the bus and showing their bus passes. They took their seats once gathered inside. Once having taken their seats, Iida did a roll call to make sure everyone was there. After doing so, he joined Izuku and Shadow at the back. It's wonderful that we get to take a seat in a warm vehicle, right? I don't mind the cold, Shadow, ironically enough, answered coldly. It made sense for him to not dislike the chilly atmosphere. His quirk did grant him ice powers after all. Yeah, it's really cold out, Izuku softly said, looking out the window. He seemed fixated on something else. Gazing out onto the snowy roads, Izuku was in deep thought. Iida, who happened to notice this, tapped Shadow's shoulder and motioned for him to get close so he could whisper. Is he okay? He questioned. He seems a bit out of it, but he was fine earlier this morning, wasn't he? Shadow looked back at Izuku. He noticed that his friend was indeed acting a bit off, glaring out into the distance with a dull expression. He's fine, but he's having some trouble, the half-and-half boy answered. Iida raised an eyebrow and tried to think of what could be bothering his buddy. Was it schoolwork? No, he'd been caught up on all of that. Could it have been the thought of being homesick during the holidays? That might have been it, but the previous week their friend had been displaying how excited he was to spend Christmas with them. Besides, he wasn't obliged to stay with them on Christmas. Izuku, Ida called out. The green-haired boy snapped out of his trance and turned to face his friend. Is it true you're having trouble? Izuku's cheeks turned red, he scratched the back of his head. Well, he muttered to himself. He was trying to speak, but he's struggling to find the words. Ida took note of this. Whatever he was trying to say seemed very hard to say or perhaps quite personal. He thought about this for a moment, then having a sudden realization. He didn't know how he didn't make sense of it before, but he came to the conclusion that his sudden shift in behavior must have been related to the incident that happened with him and Achako yesterday on the walk back from school. Izuku, pardon my intrusion yet again, but does this problem have to do with Achako? He said quietly, trying to keep the conversation to only the three of them. Izuku's face turned a bright red after hearing Iida's question. Now he really was struggling to speak. He hid his face with his arms in an attempt to shield himself from the embarrassment he felt. Sorry, I didn't mean to make you upset or anything. If you don't wish to speak about it, I won't press further. Then no, it's fine. Izuku said, stammering with his words. Why, you're right, but please don't say anything. Iida smiled and gave a hearty laugh. Don't worry. I wouldn't give out any secrets if you didn't want me to. The class president gave a reassuring smile. Izuku lowered his arms and nodded. The boy softly smiled, his cheeks became red and he looked down as he spoke. Well, I think she's really cute. I might have a crush on her, Izuku admitted. He took a deep breath and looked up at his two friends. Now he didn't look so happy, but somber. I don't think she feels the same way about me though. I'm not sure why she would. Upon hearing this, Shadow spoke up. You won't know until you give it a shot. What if you're wrong? He asked, trying to persuade his friend to take the chance. Iida nodded, agreeing with his statement. He has a point, Izuku. You shouldn't be so doubtful of yourself, he replied. Well, you believe your outcome will be negative. I have to interject and say I strongly disagree. Why you believe so? Izuku asked. His frown started to turn upside down, but unfortunately for him he became more red at the success rate according to his friends. Of course, Iida positively exclaimed. I believe the two of you would make a successful couple. If you both think so, but I'm not good with this, Izuku stated, scratching the back of his head in embarrassment. He had a lack of experience with love. It wasn't necessarily something you could blame him for. Izuku used to be quirkless and was in an area surrounded by discriminatory students who wouldn't even look his way because of how he was born. Growing up he didn't have many friends, if none at all. There was no wonder to why he was self-doubting or lacked proper experience with these things. Luckily things changed. Ever since All Might gave him his power, it's been good and would only get better from there. He had the chance to be a hero, he had gotten into a pristine school, and he's made a lot of friends that are ever so caring and accept him for who he is. I wouldn't know how to ask her out, he continued, sighing. Shadow and Iida sat for a moment and wondered about how their friend could go about this. It didn't take long until the cunning dark-haired boy had an ingenious idea. I have an idea, he said loudly with a grin. Christmas Eve is only a week away, and I believe that would be a perfect time to ask her. I've heard that couples spend that day together, Izuku noted, placing a hand on his chin. Then you should ask her on that day, Shadow suggested. It'd be better than to wait and not take the opportunity. Izuku took Shadow and Iida's words into consideration and took some time to think. The duo had good points, but there still was this uncertainty in his mind. What happens if she says no? The green-haired boy started to think negatively and was caught up in his own thoughts of how awkward it would have been if this didn't succeed. Don't think about that and focus on what you want, Izuku, Iida countered. If it helps, just remember that Shadow and I at least believe this will turn out in your favor. Izuku took into consideration what Iida had just said and gave another moment to make up his mind on the ultimatum he was given. Once having done so, the boy looked up and gave a smile of confidence. Okay. I'll do it. I'll ask Achako out on Christmas Eve, Izuku promised. Shadow and Iida smiled. They were happy to see him taking initiative and being brave enough to confess so soon. Meanwhile, over on the other side of the bus, Achako was having a very similar conversation with Sayu and Mina. So, when are you going to ask him? Mina cheerily said, swinging her head left and right over how cute she found this. Ooh. Better question, how will you do it? Achako, who was similarly hiding her face, got all close to Mina and glanced around the bus. SSH. I don't want anyone to hear this, Achako cried out to her friend. Besides, I don't even know how to ask someone anyway, she softly said, sighing. Sayu put a finger on her lip and looked at her distressed friend. Is it really that hard? The frog girl asked. Mina gazed at Sayu and let her jaw drop open. The pink girl didn't believe what she just heard. Well, of course it isn't easy, Sue. She started on a rant about how love worked. You have to find the right moment and plan out just how exactly to go about this, because not every boy is the same, and some can be harder to get than others, and Mina was cut off, halting her lecture. This isn't really helping guys, Achako admitted, sighing and looking down with her hands still pressed against her flushed face. Besides, what if he says no? Suddenly, Mina started to giggle at the question, which made the girl raise an eyebrow in confusion, hoping her laughter wasn't a bad thing. Is Zuko saying no? She asked in response. Oh, honey, I don't know why you would think that. Huh? What do you mean? Achako asked, still confused by Mina's vague answer. Was she implying what Achako would have been ever so happy to hear? Sayu made a frog noise and then answered her puzzled friend. She's saying that Izuku already has a crush on you. Sayu bluntly stated, prompting Mina to giggle while Achako's face flourished into a bright pink. She had a hard time believing such a thing, but perhaps they were right is what she told herself. After all, she knew they wouldn't lie to her. Hey, are you sure? She asked, her heart quickly pounded as she awaited an answer. Yep. Mina said with a reassuring smile, giggling. He's totally got it in for you, girl. Her friend grabbed a hold of Achako and shook her by the shoulders, squealing with excitement. A student in front of them heard the noise and turned back to examine the source of this commotion. Their shining vice president, Momo, was the inquisitive classmate. I hate to interrupt, but could you tone it down a notch, Mina? She kindly asked. Mina turned and quickly apologized. Sorry about that, but we're just so excited. Oh? Momo curiously asked. What about? Well, Mina started, much to Chako's dismay. Our friend here has a bit of a crush on some lucky boy, and she's nervous about asking him out. Isn't that cute? She put her hands on her cheeks and started to sway once again. Momo glanced over at the zero-gravity girl and noticed she looked nervous. Perhaps she didn't want Mina to have given out her secret like that. To reassure her, Momo gave a warm smile. Don't worry, this seems like something quite personal, so I won't go about telling everyone. She was a woman of her word and very rarely broke a promise or any rules that were set. Hearing this made Achako feel a bit safer about her undisclosed crush becoming public, but she felt as if Mina spouting it out so easily was a bit unnecessary. That was Mina, though, expressive and joyous. If you don't mind me asking, Achako, is this boy Izuku? Momo asked. Achako's cheeks turned pinker than they normally were, and she was at a loss of words for a moment. Yeah. She muttered, trying not to let anyone who wasn't in on the secret hear about this. In that case, I believe you have nothing to worry about. It doesn't matter when or where you ask him, but if you want to make it special, then I suggest you do it during Christmas Eve. Momo knowledgeably suggested. Sayu put a finger on her cheek and stuck her tongue out. She had a puzzled look on her face. Oh, why Christmas Eve? The frog girl asked. Around Christmas time, especially on Christmas Eve, couples gather together as the holiday season isn't just a festive time, but a romantic one as well. She sounded as if she'd been reading straight off of a script. The girls viewed Momo as a very informative person, and would always go to her if they were in need of an efficient study session or being troubled on a lesson. Then Christmas Eve is when this should happen. Mina yelled out, bumping her fist into the air. Achako took a deep breath and thought for a moment. She thought about the situation she was in and how hard it would be to ask him out, but then she recalled the experiences she had previously had before. It wasn't as physically straining as the UA Sports Festival, and it definitely wouldn't be soul-crushing if it didn't work out. She took her friend's words into consideration and made a decision for herself. She put on a determined look and raised her fist in the air. I'll do it. Achako exclaimed, speaking a bit loudly. Meanwhile, Ejiro and Tor were sitting beside one another and watching as the pandemonium went on. I wonder what they're all excited about, Tor said, being quite curious. I have no idea, Ejiro said as he glanced around at his peers. Maybe they're just excited to be getting a tree. After a while, the bus came to a stop. Ida took note of this and stood, raising his voice and instructing the kids of 1A to get off of the bus. As one giant group, the swarm of students moved off of the bus and were met with the entrance of Nusatafu's train station. Here we are, Mina said cheerily. Now we just have to take this train and then we'll be set. You sure know your way around here, don't you? Momo asked with a light smile. Of course. I use the trains all the time now. Come on, we've got to go. Mina replied with a giggle, leading the group inside. The students followed the alien queen, and once entered the building, they were met with crowds of people rushing around everywhere. Despite it being such a giant place to roam around in the rush of all these people, it became quite a narrow and closed-in space. Everyone, stick together, Momo called out. The students obeyed her and huddled together, not wanting to get lost in such a place. It's over here, everyone, Mina pointed, strolling through the crowds. She didn't stick close to the group, much to her class rep's dismay. It was probably because she was confident of where she was going, because she had been here so many times before. Luckily, the group caught up to Mina as she was swiping a card through a gate and entering a waiting station for the train. The students did the same. A few of them were relieved that despite all the commotion, none of them got lost. Just to double check, however, Ida and Momo did a roll call as well as a head count. Okay. We've got everyone here. You can all take a seat now as we wait, Momo instructed. Only a handful of students were able to take a seat, while the rest had to stand, which only showed just how busy these places could become at a time like this. Man, it's so busy around here. Satu said as he glanced around the station. Kota, who was sitting next to him, nodded in agreement. Not to mention it's so cold outside. He shivered and sneezed. Aoyama, who had taken a seat on the other side of him, pulled out a handkerchief and handed it over to him. Here you go, Monami, he said with elegance. His French accent was transparent. Satu raised an eyebrow before taking a hold and using it. It wasn't expected for Aoyama to have something like this, but then again it was Aoyama who was quite unpredictable. Why do you have something like this? He curiously asked as he handed it back to him. Aoyama placed it back into his coat pocket and started to laugh. I would never allow the common cold to get the best of moi. The French boy placed a hand on his chest and gave a glamorous smile. So I always carry around my special handkerchief. Okay. Hey, aren't you freezing? He asked, pointing at Aoyama's apparel. The boy was wearing a thin yet stylish dark trench coat, a pair of leather gloves, and a single red scarf that hadn't been wrapped around his face. His flamboyant outfit didn't look very fit for the winter weather. Oh, but of course not. He shrugged it off and put his hands on his cheeks. I'm as warm as ever. Well, if you say so. Satu sat back and placed his hands behind his head. The three of them sat there and waited for the train to arrive. It didn't take long until they heard the sound of the wheels running against the railroad. Once the train had showed up, it got chaotic. There were people moving in and out all over the place. If the students thought it was crowded at the entrance, then getting on the train would have seemed as if there was no space whatsoever. Fortunately, all of the students pushed through the cramped waiting lobby and arrived on the train. Again, Momo and Iida performed a headcount before it started to move. From there on, our heroes ventured out and continued their journey in search for a Christmas tree. Will the expedition they've been trekking through prove successful in leading them to a perfect tree? What do our star-crossed lovers have in store for the arrival of Christmas Eve? These questions will be answered soon enough in the following chapters. Author's note. Hello. Merry late Christmas and a Happy New Year to you all. I hope you all enjoyed this chapter as it took a while to make after I'd taken a short break from writing. My apologies as I know some of you had been waiting over a month. Once again, I wouldn't be taking this long to put out a chapter as I have returned from my break and will be ensuring that you all will be able to read the next chapter as soon as I can finish it. On another note, did everyone get what they wanted for Christmas? Anyways, I'll see you all soon with a brand new chapter coming out in just a short while. I hope you all have happy holidays. Chapter 5 The Snowy Journey Part 2. After pushing through a harsh and relentless crowd, our heroes had made their way onto the train as the search for a perfect tree continued. The students were crammed in the small car as it headed off out of Musatafu, making its way towards the town Mina was guiding them to. Although the train had far less people than at the station, it was very packed, and seats were hard to snag, so a few of them had to stand. One of the few that had fortunately obtained a seat was Momoyoi Rozu, who had been swift enough to take one before all of them filled. Glancing around, she was mentally checking that all of her friends had made it inside. Being caught up in her own thoughts, Momo hadn't noticed the boy beside her who was staring with a blank look on his face. Finishing checking the other side, the dark-haired girl turned her head only to be caught off guard with the sudden appearance of her classmate, Shadow Todoroki. Nearly jumping, her eyes widened in shock. Shadow didn't have a similar reaction to her sudden surprise, keeping the same bland face he had before. Shadow, she said, starting off a sentence before the boy interrupted her. Yeah? He replied in a monotone voice. Raising an eyebrow, he continued to stare at the vice president. Momo's cheeks becoming a bright red, she placed a hand over her mouth and proceeded to resume her sentence. And my apologies, she said, lowering her head in embarrassment. In an apologetic tone, Momo explained herself to the young man who didn't seem like he cared. You see, caught me off guard. Don't take my actions as rude, please. Awaiting a response, silence was exchanged between the both of them. It was awkward to say the least, until the two were released from it via the cold boy's voice. Oh, sorry, Shadow said, glancing down at the dark-haired girl. He shifted his view away from her and looked across the car in which the class were placed in. Spotting a few of his classmates, the particular individuals that gave interest to him were the two lovers, Izuku and Ichako. The both of them seemed to be conversing about something that he couldn't seem to hear due to the distance between them. Catching the pair with happy faces, a small smile formed onto the reserved half student. Although it was nothing major like a confession, he knew that his friend enjoyed being around this girl, and had been glad that he went to pursue his heart. Having their roles now reversed, Momo was the one glancing over at Shadow. Following his trail of vision, she came to see that he had his eyes set over towards where a few of their classmates had been towards the front of the car. Is something catching your eye? She asked, wondering as to what exactly had been making him smile. It was uncommon of him to do so. Taking his eyes off of them, he turned his head to the curious girl. It's nothing, Shadow replied, placing himself farther back in his seat with an appearance devoid of expression. Then, he went to stare out the window and gaze upon the snowy city that the train went about passing through. While he did so, Momo still had the mystery of a short smile that for a brief moment had fallen upon him. Deciding to press further, she made sure not to go about it in an intrusive or rude way that might upset him. "Are you sure?" was asked in a sweet tone that came with a warm smile. "Seeing you smile isn't an everyday thing." Not taking his eyes off the scenery, he shrugged. "It's just a smile." "Well, it's a nice smile." Momo complimented in a softer tone, her cheeks gained a pinkish hue to them. This was enough to direct the uninterested boy's attention back towards her way. Hearing that he had a nice smile was something that she hadn't said to him before, which was a rarer sight than a smile to her. With a now confused look on his face, having his eyebrows raised and mouth half open, he watched as she placed her hands in between her thighs and stared down at them. Seeing his reaction, Momo assumed that it was a sign of being offended. Eyes widening, she quickly lifted her hands and waved them in a comedic fashion, as another apology came from her mouth. I'm sorry again. I didn't mean to offend you." "It's fine." Being cut off, she halted. Taking in a deep breath, he let out a sigh and went back to watching outside as they passed by buildings. Taking his unfriendly stare into consideration, she decided on being more cautious, even though being aware he wasn't any harm, unlike someone such as Bakugo. "If I may ask, you don't seem to smile generally, is there a reason for that?" Pressing even further, Momo asked yet another question to the cold and apathetic boy. Shaking his head, he went with a simple response. "I don't feel the need to." In the back of his head he was uncertain as to why she seemed to care about his smile. It wasn't anything special to him, and even if it was nice, there were many more to be given out by his classmates. Wanting to stray away from the topic, he questioned her about something unrelated before she could respond. "Do you know when we'll be there?" "Oh, no, sorry," Momo replied, keeping her eyes on the distant boy, her cheeks having been drained the majority of the blush. "I hadn't gotten the chance to take a look at any of the signs or further question Mina about this before the train had arrived." Pocketing his hands, Shadow pivoted to face frontwards and lifted his head up, closing his eyes. "When we get off of this train, wake me up," Shadow said, preparing to take a short nap. Still being tired and having been out all day, he thought that resting would be a good use of his time on here. Watching him as he went about towards sleeping, she responded with a simple yes that followed up with a nod. Momo turned away from him and placed a hand on her chin as she thought to herself after he went under. What was on her mind was more or less about his smile again, but his reaction towards how she complimented him. The face he gave was a hostile look of confusion that could be mistaken for an expression of being offended by what she said, but according to him that wasn't the case. It was rather off-putting to say the least, since it strayed from his usual demeanor, but maybe he just didn't enjoy being complimented. Another thought now entered her head, which was that she was still unaware of how long the trip would be. Reaching into her jacket, she took out a crimson smartphone and opened it up to her contacts. Scrolling through lists of peers she added, Momo eventually came to Mina's name, which was addressed as Pinky, to which the alien-like girl had done herself. A text was sent after opening up their message history. "Pretty, do you have a moment to speak, Mina?" "Pinky, hey, what's up, yeah, Momo?" "Pretty, oh, nothing really, thank you for asking though. Do you know how long the trip from where we started and back will be?" "Pinky, the ride for the train will be like an hour or so, then all we need to do is find the best tree and head back, so more than 2 hours. "Pretty, it seems to be quite far, how do you know of it considering the distance?" "Pinky, I didn't always live in Musatafada. Before middle school started my family moved there and that's where I met Ige." "Pretty, so, you from the town we're heading to? It's exciting to learn something new about a friend, but who is Ige?" "Pinky, Hiroshima." "Pretty, oh, I see. The both of you went to school together before you, eh?" "Pinky, yeah, but we didn't really know each other. It's cool now that we're horn buddies." "Pretty, horn buddies." "Pinky, cuz we both have horns." "Oh. Pretty interesting, well thank you for letting me know, since Shadow had asked me about it, but I didn't know." "Pinky, no problem. Also it's really nice that you're letting him sleep on you." With the most recent message being received, Momo gained a puzzled look on her face. She didn't know what her friend had meant. Shadow wasn't sleeping on he. Turning her head, a small gasp came out of her mouth, which was covered by her hand to avoid making a scene. There he was, the inexpressive boy, having his head rested against her shoulder as he slept. Staring at him, Momo's cheeks regained that pinkish color that had been there not too long ago. She was quite flushed at having him sleep on her. Not wanting it to be misconstrued, she quickly went back to her phone and proceeded to explain things to Mina. "Pretty, oh, it's not like that. He just was going for a nap and I hadn't noticed." "Pinky, sewer." "Pretty, it's true, I really hadn't seen him until you pointed it out." "Pinky, aha. Still you tots look so cute together." "Pretty, we're not together though." "Pinky, if you say so. Still I ship it." Sighing with a flustered face, Momo shut her phone off and stared down at the ground as her friend's innocent teasing entered the girl's mind. It wasn't like that, her and Shadow did not have anything going on between them. The two of them were just acquaintances if not friends. She didn't know if there was a friendship between the duo, being that he hadn't spent much time with her on his own accords, nor did he approach her to take part in conversation normally. Still, the antisocial boy laying against her was different, but not in a bad way. He seemed to be at peace as shown by his relaxed expression she caught when lifting her head. Momo's staring at him formed another blush when Mina's words or rather text echoed in her head. Turning away quickly, she thought about waking him up, but it would be rather rude to do so. For now she kept him laying there, as embarrassing as it was now. From across the car was her pink friend giving her a thumbs up with a cute wink. "You go, girl," she said softly, giggling to herself about the situation. Aoyama, who was sitting beside her with an unexplained cup of hot chocolate, followed her vision and smiled as he captured what she'd seen in the same perspective. As he sipped on his beverage he glanced around the rest of the car. Spotting his friend Izuku, Aoyama watched as the conversation between him and a bubbly brunette went on. He was one of the very few that caught that the both of them had a thing for one another. While he could go about and tell the both of them, he preferred to watch as this went on. Young love was so romantic. It was admittedly fun to watch this transpire into something new, being more enjoyable since a holiday comprised of giving and love, especially in this area, was on its way. An eye suddenly came into view of the blonde French boy who nearly spilled his drink. Following that, a mouth came along and spoke in a scratchy voice. "What are you looking at?" it asked, the tentacle turning back to back. Recognizing who this mouth belonged to, Aoyama stared up at Shoji, who had his winged arms wrapped tightly around a pole. Smiling in his usual manner, he lifted his hands and shook off his classmate in a comedic sense. "Nothing, Manami. I was taking in the beautiful view of the snowy city from outside," he said, making up an excuse so that he wouldn't have to release the truth. Although Aoyama didn't expect Shoji to tell anyone if the truth was stated, he hadn't wanted to take the chance and ruin what was in front of him. It was like a movie unfolding in front of him, and he didn't want to spoil the ending towards the characters. "Oh, I see," he replied, the artificial mouth on his tentacle speaking for him. It maneuvered itself away from Aoyama and back towards Shoji's set of arms. "This train ride is taking a while," the winged boy continued, changing the topic for now. "Eh?" Aoyama lifted his cup of hot chocolate and drank some more of the hot beverage. Shoji was confused as he now noticed it, having not seen him acquire it at any point before everyone got onto the train. "Hey, where did you get that hot chocolate?" he asked, curious as to how he attained it. The French boy lowered his cup and gave out a smug grin before leading into a light chuckle in response to his question. Turning his head, he gave a wink and answered in a sketchy manner. "It's a secret," Aoyama said cheekily before turning back and taking yet another sip of his hot chocolate. The conversation ended there as the wait for the train to stop took place. It railed onto the tracks at a considerable pace and passed through cities which gave beautiful scenery on the journey towards the small town Class 1A's pink friend was taking them to. The students were kept for an hour just as Mina said they would be. After a long ride the train stopped at a station and let out a fuzzy message onto the intercom. It was now time to get off. The group of kids weren't the only ones to stand, as many adults, men and women alike, stood and pushed through one another, gathered in a clustered crowd that made it even more difficult for them to exit because of how narrow the cars were. Well, it was just one of those things that made up their transportation to some. For most it proved to be quite the challenge pushing through to make their way. Luckily all of the students had made it out and waited by as a gang together, while their presidents did a head count. Upon finishing up with it, Ida noticed that there seemed to be a student missing, and yelled it out towards his peers. "We're missing one student," he said, making the other students glance around for who wasn't there. "Has anyone seen Toru?" A pink glove was floating in the air and waved out towards everyone, followed by the voice of a girl. "I'm here." Pivoting towards the girl, Ida saw through the packed people the rest of Tori and her outfit as she pushed through the rest of them to reconnect. "Sorry about that," she apologized, banging her head which had a knit wool hat placed on. There were a lot of people. Smiling, Ida shook his head. "It's no worry, we were just concerned for where everyone was," he said in an understanding tone. Now that he and Momo were finished with their head counts, the both of them headed up towards the front of the group. "Lead the way, Mina," the president called out, prompting the alien queen to take charge and wander along the pathway. Exiting the train station, Mina led them along the icy streets of the small town. It was quite rural, with there not being many buildings and having more landscape to gaze at compared to the more urban cities such as Musatafu. Throughout their voyage in the town the students had passed by eye-catching scenery. There were white snowy hills that were home to forests that looked quite beautiful, especially at this time of year, and ponds that had been frozen, which appeared stable enough to skate upon them. Where they were currently was considered the edges of the town, which is why there had been so much nature. Strolling along down the place, Kirishima passed through his friends and made his way towards the front where Mina was. "So this is where you lived before school?" he asked a bit intrusively. "Yep," she enthusiastically replied, smiling over at her horn buddy. "I lived here right up until I moved to where you and I went to school. It's kind of a small town," he replied, scratching the back of his head as the boy glanced around. Yeah, that's why my parents moved, Mina said, prancing down the streets. It's nice here, but it's too small, and they also got new jobs so that helped. Well, yeah, Kirishima said, turning his head to glance over at the field full of trees. It's cool, but hey, there's a forest. Imagine living in one of those, that'd be so manly. In response to his idea, she giggled. Throughout the years he hadn't really changed. Kirishima was always fascinated by being manly, even if it meant living in a forest. We're here to get a tree, not survive in the wild, Aich. She patted him on the back and continued to giggle. Yeah, it'd be manly though. Placing her arms behind her back now, she practically skipped down the street which was filled with ice, and could cause someone to slip. That wasn't the case with Mina though. She didn't show any signs of losing her balance, and was freely hopping around with an excited look on her face. Hey, you gonna slip if you keep doing that? Kirishima called out, cuffing his hands next to his mouth. Nah, I'm fine, Mina reassured, turning back to face him. I slide on my acid all the time, so this is no biggie. Continuing to flow about onto the patches of ice, she along with the rest of her class, made it towards the commercial district. It was a street that passed by some houses and lead into a big plaza full of stores which were placed together near a medium-sized shopping center. It wasn't nearly as big as Musatafu's, but it was still something. Perhaps it looked bigger though because of the reduced population of people. Nevertheless, the pink girl stopped in her tracks and held her arms out towards everyone to showcase it off. Hey guys, this is where we buy everything. The students halted and glanced around for a few moments to take in everything. It was a pretty-looking plaza that had quite a few different stores on the outside of the main mall. There were smaller trees planted outside some of them, and people were starting to hang Christmas lights in the front. So, yeah, she said, standing with appreciation for how the workers made it look at this time of year. It clearly captured everyone's attention. This is where we'll be taking a break. The break, both Momo and Ida asked, not aware of this. We didn't have it written down that we were taking a break here. Ida continued, shooting his arm outwards at Mina. This wasn't set on our schedule. I know that, but don't you feel hungry or want to sit down? She asked, placing her hands on her hips. Well, Ida replied, feeling his stomach rumble. He hadn't gotten a chance to eat breakfast before they left. The rest of the class felt similarly, not having a chance either. You are correct, I am quite empty on food, he said with a sigh. Pushing up his glasses, Ida turned towards everyone and yelled out to them the change of plans. Okay, everyone. We'll be taking a break to go and eat, but meet back here in an hour, okay? The students nodded in unison. Off we go then. As everyone started to spread out, Denki came up to Jiru and gave his best attempt at a charming smile. Hey Jiru. The punkish girl replied. She was glancing around the plaza and was deciding where she would be heading off to. I think I saw a place where they're selling snowboards nearby. You wanna come with? Denki asked, pocketing his hands and still giving off that smile. Jiru turned her head and faced him with a blank stare. She was twirling her earjack with a finger. Shouldn't you eat first? Denki dropped his head and gave out a sigh. His face looked similar to when he would overuse his quirk. To him there was never a simple yes or no with her, which made it a bit difficult to ask her for things. Lifting his head once more, the smile returned to his face, though this time seeming less charming. You'll be in there looking around and before you know it we'll have to be back here. Yeah, but how about we do that after we eat then? He said, trying to persuade her. A and I won't be in there for that long. Tilting his head, he waited for her response in hopes that she'd accompany him. Pierre thought for a moment while staring at him. He seemed a bit desperate, but if he said he wouldn't waste their time, then she didn't have much of a problem. Fine, but don't go wasting time, she said, reminding him so he wouldn't forget her terms. With a big grin, Denki nodded and took a hold of Jiru's hand and headed out towards the mall. Hey, wait. She cried out, her cheeks turning a bright pink. Come on, let's go so we don't waste time then, he replied, dragging her off elsewhere. Meanwhile, while the students were all branching off and going about grabbing something to eat, Achako was still standing there and searching about for where she could go. The girl didn't have much money with her, so she didn't want to go get something expensive, but she was quite hungry. A boy with green hair approached her and spoke with a nervous tone. Hey, she turned around upon hearing a familiar voice. Seeing that it was Izuku, a pink blush formed on her cheeks. Oh, Deku. Achako replied, placing her hands behind her back. Hey, what's up? I was just deciding on where to eat. How about you? He said, scratching the back of his head awkwardly. Izuku didn't have his eyes on her and was looking off to the side. Just like her, he had a growing blush on his face. Yeah, same here, Achako said with an awkward smile, trying not to stare at him for too long. There was this bakery I saw, but I'm not sure if I have enough. I could come with and maybe split the cost, Izuku offered, rushing halfway through the sentence. The flushed brunette directed her vision straight towards his eyes, which caused him to return the favor. For a moment the both of them stared at one another with a silence between them, their blushes growing. It's fine if you wanted to go alone though, he said, breaking the silence and raising his arms to shake off the idea with a gesture. Wait, Deku. I just don't want you spending your money on me, that's all, she said, shaking her head. And no, it's fine. Please don't feel like you owe me anything, he replied, assuring her there wouldn't be any sort of debt between them. Besides, I didn't bring much either. Standing for a moment to think about things, Achako contemplated to let him help pay. She enjoyed sweets, especially mochi, but it felt wrong to have him help pay. Then again, he brought up some good points, and if there wasn't any debt between them, then she couldn't say no. Taking a deep breath, she smiled with rosy cheeks and nodded her head. Okay then, let's go, she said, walking down the plaza and towards the bakery with Izuku behind. Unknowing to her, Izuku had a red face that showed he was clearly blushing. Similarly, she had the same. In the boy's head he was trying to think of things to say when being seated. His geek side was showing as he hadn't had lunch with a girl alone before. Sure, he sat with her at lunch, but that was with everyone else. In Ichako's mind, she was thinking about how nice it was of him to pitch in with money. It wasn't something the girl would have preferred, but it was a kind act nonetheless. That trait was an admirable one regarding his character. They soon approached the bakery. It was a pink building that had many decorations out front. As mentioned earlier, there was a tiny Christmas tree planted in a pot outside the store just like many others. Achako knelt down near it and gave a big grin. This is so cute. Let's find a tree just as good as this one. Yeah. Izuku, who was now standing next to her, agreed. We're going to find an amazing tree. Yes. Achako replied, raising her fist into the air. She stood and started to make her way into the bakery, but before doing so she turned back to the boy and stopped. Confused, he stopped as well. Hey Deku, she said softly, lowering her head to hide a returning blush. Thanks. And no problem, he said, stuttering slightly. The both of them then headed inside and walked around the bakery. The inside looked just as great as the outside, if not better, having beautifully painted walls and pretty tiled flooring. The interior design wasn't the best part. The pastries that were lined up on shelves behind a glass protector smelled absolutely delicious. The two of them came up to the counter, and after momentarily discussing what both of them could buy, they ended up ordering mochi, specifically green tea mochi. Placing themselves down at a booth, the both of them snacked and spoke about things. There were times where one of them would look at the other without them noticing and turn away out of embarrassment. Izuku would spend a bit of the time speaking about heroes, which was a bit geeky, but she didn't mind as it was the same with how she felt. The conversation delved deeper than that, with speaking about the day and going back to the tree their class was in search of. Talking wasn't just the best part, the mochi they both had was absolutely delicious. So good in fact that there was a temptation to get more, but blowing off another portion of their money was out of the question. Although there were awkward moments of silence and a bit of blushing, overall the duo had a great time hanging out together. Checking his phone, Izuku noticed that nearly an hour had passed. It was almost time to report back to everyone at the plaza. Hey Deku, when do we have to go? Achako asked, finishing her last piece of sweet mochi. It's just about time, he replied, putting his phone away. We've gotta go then, she said, gathering her garbage. Izuku nodded, doing so with his. The both of them stood up and headed out, tossing the garbage in the bin. Before leaving they thanked the workers with a bow and left. The way back was a short and silent walk. Both of them were thinking about how good of a time they had. Blushes forming on their faces, the two looked away from one another and continued walking. Approaching the plaza they spotted their classmates all gathered together once more. Momo and Iida were doing a headcount once again while the students conversed. In the midst of this, Denki was showing off his new snowboard to his group of friends. Wait, so you really bought a snowboard? Zero asked, staring at it in awe. Yeah, I did. Isn't it cool? Denki replied, holding it out so they could see. It was a long snowboard that was painted with two primary colors, black and yellow. It had a lightning bolt pattern stretching around it in black, with the base being painted the brighter color. It was quite fitting for him and matched his hairstyle. Why the hell did you get that? Deku asked, crossing his arms. We aren't even going snowboarding. I know, but what about for the rest of the week? He said, cherishing his purchase. Besides, I got a good deal on this, and it matches me. Well, I guess it's pretty cool. Zero added in, checking it out. Okay everyone, Iida called out. It's time we get going again. Turning, he waited for Mina to take the lead again, and followed as did the rest. We're almost there. Upon leaving the shopping district, Mina guided everyone down the streets of the town, and toured them by adding in commentary about certain places they passed by, such as a firehouse and a park. She said that years ago the pink girl and her family would spend time here out in the winter, going skating on a frozen body of water that was filled with ducks during the summer. Passing by, Mineta, who was at the back, decided to speak about the place. Dude, imagine how many girls could be there, he said, thinking about women yet again with a deep blush. They love ice skating. A tongue came out and slapped the great boy across the face. It was sighs. It seems that's all he can think about. Fumikage, who was next to them, said with a sigh. The students continued walking down the streets and made a quarter turn along the street which led them closer to their destination. It was a total of a 15-minute walk before Mina halted with a giant grin. The rest of the students stopped and looked at what was upon them. Squealing, she turned to everyone and yelled out towards them. Here we are. There it was. After heading outwards from the town and back into the rural side, it stood there behind dark fencing, a giant field of snow that had been filled with trees. The land stretched far out past what they could see, and there were many pathways cleared of snow leading in different directions, where the shapes and sizes varied. The students stood in awe at the area, having not seen a place this humongous and beautiful to shop for Christmas trees. If there was any place to find such a perfect tree, it'd be here, and that was now understood by all of them. Well, what are you waiting for? Mina asked, letting out a laugh. Let's go. And with that, our heroes have finally made it to their destination after trekking for so long through the cold winter weather. It was time for them to begin their search for the perfect tree in preparation for Christmas. With smiles and shared determination, the students of Class 1 are headed forward onto the world. And, man, did this take a lot longer than I promised. Sorry again, truth is I've had a giant writer's block and have been lazy, but I'm returning to writing once more. I enjoy writing this, and I know everyone who follows Favor's comments feels the same way. I shouldn't have to keep everyone waiting after more than 2 months since an update. Currently it's spring break, so I'm going to get a chance to write, so stay tuned again. You're all awesome. Chapter 7 The Perfect Tree. The last time we saw our heroes, they were just about to enter their long-awaited destination, in search of a perfect Christmas tree. Will it be attainable? Mr. Kiki, called out Mina, rushing forward through the snow, ahead of the others yet again. Wait for the rest of us. Ida yelled, hoping that she would listen. Unfortunately, she didn't and kept moving, which led the young man to facepalm. She wasn't much to listen to authority, especially him. Then again, Mina wasn't the only one who disobeyed him. It was troubling for a class president to deal with, but it's all part of the job. As she ran, she passed by a few residents, some of which she knew and waved to with a cheery smile. Stopping and talking to them would be nice, but something had to be done first and foremost, and that was to greet someone special to her. A family friend, one she knew from her youth. There, standing proudly while speaking to a couple who appeared to be customers, was an older man to whom Mina was racing towards. He was tall and well built for his age, which appeared to be early mid-40s, and had a very unique hairstyle. It was a dark green and looked as if it was not hair, but in fact pine needles, just like the very ones on Christmas trees. It covered his head and even made for a beard that was surprisingly well kept. Now, our Preki was just about to finish speaking, but was interrupted upon feeling a set of arms swiftly wrap around his waist. He almost lost his balance, though fortunately he was able to stay upright with an attempt to keep his feet planted in the snow. It was a good thing he didn't fall, considering the fact that there was a patch of ice right behind him. He needed to salt that. Hey, whoa. Who's got a hold of me? He asked, glancing around with a concerned expression. That soon changed into a soft smile when he spotted a certain pink girl, one he recognized. Ah, Mina, kiddo. It's been so long, the man said, lifting her up with a twirl. She giggled and stepped back after having her feet placed back down into the snow. Oh, excuse me for a moment or two, he said towards the couple with a smile. They seemed to understand and simply went to take a seat on a bench. Yeah, it really has. Mina was swinging her head back and forth. It's great seeing you. Say, what brings you in town though? He asked, stroking his chin. Mr. Kiki already knew why she would be here given the time of year. Oh, you should know that. She joked, her laughter continuing. I'm here for one of your trees. One of my trees, Well, I'm glad you've decided to choose one of my own to bring home. Of course. You've got some of the best trees, and we're out looking for the best. Mina complimented, believing her words to hold a strong truth. That's awfully nice of you to say, kiddo. Mr. Kiki said, a flushed expression now looming over his face due to the praise. It meant something to him when people he knew gave such positive reviews of his product. There were people who stopped in to shop at around this time of year who said such things as well, but he always felt the most genuine of happiness when it came from those close to him. Glancing around, he scanned the area for her parents. She couldn't have come here alone, hence why she used the term we, but he didn't seem to spot those familiar pink faces anywhere nearby. Say, where are your parents? I haven't seen them in some time, he asked curiously. I didn't come here with them this time. Tilting her head, she gave him a cheeky smile, knowing that might have come as a surprise to him. After all, the girl and her parents traveled here in a group when it came to shopping for trees. Eh? The older man was indeed surprised, but a bit puzzled as well. So you came this far without them to pick out a tree? I've got to say, your parents must be really trusting in you this year, he said, crossing his arms as the smile which had momentarily left returned upon his face, although appearing more proud than before. That's really mature of you as well. I'm not alone either. I brought some friends. We're looking for a tree to put in our dorm. she explained, motioning her arm back towards the entrance, where just right now came a group of nearly 20 high school students strolling along the snow. Most of them were glancing around at the place, being quite gigantic in size. The tons of trees scattered across the snowy fields covered quite some distance. A lot of them had smiles on their faces, being quite astonished at just how many there were. "Hey Mina," called out a familiar boy in a manly voice, approaching the two of them. "You ran off on us," he said, scratching the back of his head as a small chuckle came out. "Sorry, Ich," she apologized, bowing her head. "I just couldn't wait to see a friend." Mina pointed at Mr. Kiki, who Kirishima now noticed. When he did, the young man eyed the much older one up and down, but not in a rude way, and rather a complimentary one. The adult was quite large and well built at that, not to mention his cool facial hair. To him, this met the criteria of a manly look and excited him a little. "It's nice to meet you," he greeted, holding his hand out to shake. "I'm Kirishima." I can say the same, kid," Mr. Kiki replied, shaking the redhead's hand. Their first impressions of one another seemed to be positive, given how they spoke to one another, which was good. Not that she was worried about it being negative, but Kirishima was a close friend, and was glad to see they were getting along. "Did the rest of you class, kid?" "Oh, yeah, hey, guys," Kirishima yelled, turning his head to face them. The rest of Class 1A, who were still looking around, heard his call and followed. Iida, who had a stern look upon his face, jogged over towards the pink girl. "Mina, you cannot just run ahead without everyone, especially if you are leading us." "You are the rest of the class." His lecturer seemed to drone on for a while, as his hands shifted places to make swift gestures every few seconds or so. As that was going down, the boy and the girl, who both had a secret to tell one another, were taking a glance around the tree-filled area. "Wow, Deku, there's so many trees," Ichako said. She had never seen anything like this. It was like a winter wonderland, but more as an enchanted forest. Her eyes beamed up as the girl took it all in. "Yeah, I've never seen anything like it," Izuku replied, nodding in agreement. His head lifted like hers, but while he did so, something other than the trees caught his attention. It was the bubbly brunette. She was standing there with a smile on her soft face. As he stared, Izuku could feel his cheeks start to warm up. They were beginning to flush a bright color. Ichako had stopped looking at the trees and turned to her classmate, who was staring at her with his head in the clouds. When she got a hold of his look, she too exchanged a similar one, and between them was silence. Before one another could turn away or speak, it was then that the two were called over. Breaking away from what they were doing, they both headed towards where the rest of the class was now gathered in a circle. "Ah, we're all here," Iida said as he glanced around at everyone, counting to be sure of their presence. "We've decided that in order to maximize how much ground we'll cover, it would be best to split us into groups." It was then that Zero, who was across from the president, raised his hand. "Do we really need to make that big of a search for a tree?" he asked, scratching the side of his head. "Yes, indeed we do," he smirked, pushing up his glasses. "As students of a prestigious academy such as UA, we are taught to strive for the best we can. Settling for any old tree wouldn't cut it, which is why we must find the one most suitable." The students standing around silently listened to what he had to say. "We're looking for a perfect tree," Shadow coldly muttered. "The perfect tree," Zuko thought to himself, placing a hand on his chin. He's right. UA does only accept the best, so finding the best tree makes sense. "Precisely," Iida said back to Shadow. "We'll form groups of 4 and scatter around to search for that tree. When you believe you found one, you should report back here by the entrance." Mentioning that 4 people were in a group, everyone looked around at one another and wondered who would be with who. Some of them weren't sure who they wanted, but others were set. As the circle broke apart, Mineta, the shortest in the class, started to approach Momo with an eerie grin across his face. "Yeah Momo, let's group up," he said, chuckling as he got closer, much to girls' dismay. "Sorry, but we've already got 4. Tor exclaimed. Beside the vice president were 3 other girls. Jiru, Sayu, and Tor. "Man," Mineta grumbled bitterly while walking away. "Hey," the cougar yelled, directing his voice towards 3 students. Denki, Mina, and Kirishima, who were all next to one another. "I'm grouping up with you assholes, got it?" The presence of their loud but close friend put a smile on their faces. "Yeah, sure man." Kirishima was happy to see his pal getting more involved in this. It was much better compared to yesterday when he was acting like the Grinch. Yet another group had been paired up. Classmates left and right were huddling together, but both Izuku and Ichako were still trying to find people. The boy did not have to look very far though, as he saw 2 classmates walking towards him. It was Aoyama and Shoji who were together, but seemed to still need people. "Bonjour, mon ami," the French blonde greeted, striking a pose. "Aoyama," Izuku smiled. "Oui. I see that you don't have anyone in your group, so we thought to allow you into ours." "Sure," he said, nodding his head with joy. Aoyama was a good friend of his, and even though he didn't seem to know Shoji all too well, he was happy to be paired up with him. "We've got 3 people, and now we just need 1 more," an eye sprouted from one of Shoji's arms, and surveyed the area in search of others. Ochako has yet to find a group, let's invite her. Aoyama started to stroll through the snow with the rest following from behind. Ochako hadn't got a chance to be in a group. Everyone around her seemed to swiftly have been paired up, and she wasn't sure who to go with. It was then that she spotted the three boys approaching her. "Oh, hey Deku," she called out, waving her hand. "Do you guys need another person?" "Indeed, madam," Aoyama stated. "We're short for one. I don't have a group, so I can join." "Of course," he replied, his flamboyant smile growing with the new addition. Now that all of the students were seemingly paired up, they could start the expedition for a perfect tree. A few of these groups started to walk off before Ida shouted, the groups having called yet again. Some groaned impatiently, wanting to get this over with, while some were curious as to what he had to say this time. "Class A, remember to meet back here when you've found a candidate," he instructed, cuffing his hands together as his voice traveled. It was then that he raised his right arm with another smile. "And don't forget our school's motto, plus ultra. Plus ultra," they yelled all together. Then the group started to scatter, going in separate directions. The hunt was finally on for the perfect tree. Each group was determined to find one that would meet their expectations or even go beyond that. This wouldn't be such an easy task even for a class like this. Hundreds of trees were planted across the large white fields of snow, with the land stretching out for quite some time. Finding the perfect tree would be difficult, like finding a needle in a haystack, but it could be done. Which way should we go? Izuku wasn't sure what way would be the right one. There were so many ways to go, each of them leading to different yet similar areas. There's so much ground to cover. "This area over here doesn't have many people," Shoji suggested, one of his dupli arms pointing towards the area in question. "We could search there." "Yeah, I agree." Ochako looked off into the distance. "That looks like a good spot. Then it is where we must go," Aoyama shouted, raising his arms elegantly whilst starting to lead the way. He walked through the snow with the rest of the group behind him. When they came to the area, he smirked before stopping to turn towards them. "Would we stop?" Ochako asked, tilting her head. "This place is rather large, mademoiselle. It would be easier to find such a tree if we were to split up," he suggested, but almost in a manner where no one else would get their input, which is what he wanted despite it being controlling. "Myself and Shoji shall search elsewhere." Saying that, he slid up beside him. "Okay, we wouldn't be that far though," Shoji said in response, turning and starting to walk the other way. Aoyama did as well, but not before turning to give a wink towards the two of them. Doing that, Ochako suddenly felt her face flush a light pink. She's seen this sort of look before. It was back during their final exam for first semester when the two were partnered. He brought up the possibility of her having a crush on Izuku, and it spiraled from there. At this point did she realize what he had done with splitting them apart was on purpose. Oh, that Aoyama. He was clever and it was a sly move, but she couldn't be mad she wasn't mad. Besides, at least she could get to spend some time alone with Izuku. It might be a little awkward, but it'd be nice. Izuku was more or less a bit confused on what Aoyama meant, but he didn't seem to be totally oblivious, as his cheeks were a noticeable shade of red. Meanwhile, one of the other groups had just begun their search as well. "Stay behind me, assholes," the cougar yelled, stomping angrily through the snow. "If we're gonna find a tree before that shitty Deku does, then I'm the one who should be leading." "Geez, man, just take it easy," Dinky said, twisting a finger in his ear. "This isn't supposed to be a race." "It is to me," he loudly replied, continuing to head through the snow. The area in which they were searching also didn't seem to have many people. That was good considering it meant Bakugo didn't have to deal with anyone trying to steal a tree he spotted. Speaking of him, he was clearly taking this quite seriously compared to everyone else. Peculiar, but definitely not out of character for him. "If it's a race, then we ought to stick together," Kirishima said with a smirk, putting his fists together. "That way we don't get lost out here." "Oh, don't worry about getting lost, Aich," Mina replied, giggling. "I know Mr. Kiki's lot like the back of my hand. You're right though about sticking together, we're a team." "Yeah. Whatever," Bakugo grumbled. "Just keep up, got it." He pushed forward through the snow with a strong head, filled with determination. The young fiery blonde was going to find that tree first. He had to and nothing was going to stop him. On the other side of the forest, Izuku and Ochako were still in search. The two of them had walked a considerable distance since splitting up, but have yet to find a perfect tree. What even could be described as a perfect tree? It was proving much more difficult than originally believed to search for something such as this. "Hey, what about this one, Deku?" Ochako asked, pointing towards a tall, dark tree resting in the snow. Izuku approached her and went about analyzing it. After about a minute or so he drew a conclusion. No," he said, shaking his head. "It's of good size, but the pines are thinning out." A closer look at this tree backed up the boy's statement. While great in length, it didn't seem to be in too good of a shape. As Izuku had made note of, the pines were indeed thinning out. One could tell by how scattered they were all across the snowy ground. He let out a soft sigh and lowered his head. "Finding a perfect tree is a lot harder than I thought." "Yeah, you're right," Ochako nodded her head. There was a look of defeat that fell upon her face. She noticed a similar look in her friend. With that, in the flash of a second the girl changed her expression and spoke up. But we can't give up yet, Deku. She raised her fist towards the air. Hearing the tone shift in her voice, Izuku lifted his head and glanced towards her. Seeing the look of resolve upon her face caused his spirits to be elevated. You're right. Come on, let's keep going. She cheerily yelled, turning to move through the snow. With a smile, Izuku followed her. The two of them ran down the pathway, watching out for a tree. As they ran the girl couldn't help but laugh. She wasn't sure why she was, but she was. They eventually came across a clearing that had curved into that of a circle. The snow was flat, and it was obvious that no one had been around here. The two of them were a bit far away from everyone else it seemed. The thought of that hadn't crossed their minds, in fact nothing was, at least not now, as the two stopped in their tracks. There, in the middle of the clearing stood a large bright tree. It glistened in the light as snow fell against its healthy green pines. The sight of the tree took the kids by surprise, and they didn't speak at first due to its beauty. If there was such a thing as a perfect tree, then this would come close if not just perfect. Wow, Achako said softly. Deku, this tree is. Yeah, he replied, walking forward through the snow. This tree was amazing. The boy slowly approached the tree and raised his hand. Izuku was about to rest it against its bark when suddenly. Out of the way. A loud and familiar shout took him off guard. He backed up and turned towards the direction of the noise. That was when he spotted young Deku making his way through, his quirk propelling him through the air. Ah, Kakin! Izuku screamed, bouncing back just as he passed by. Deku made a swift landing through the snow and smiled menacingly as he hit the ground. He then turned and saw Izuku. Only then did his smile fade away. Hey! What the hell are you doing here, Deku? Deku asked, shouting in his face. I was just searching for a tree. He nervously replied, tugging on the collar of his coat. If you're thinking about taking that one back then forget it. I saw it first. Cut it out. Ichako walked up and stepped in between the two, facing Deku with an annoyed look. We got here first. You want to try me? Round-faced Deku said loudly, a small explosion igniting from the palm of his hand. It was then that three more faces emerged from behind. Mina, Kirishima, and Denki had finally caught up to him. Hey, slow down. Denki called out, sounding out of breath. He seemed a little tired, in fact they all seemed a little tired. They walked up towards the three of them. Oh, hey, looks like you guys found this one too. Beautiful, right? RRGH, we found it first. Deku interjected before either of the two could speak, sounding more furious than before. Hey, let's not fight about the tree. Kirishima stepped closer towards him. Even though we were racing, I guess it doesn't really matter about who found it first. Either way, if it's good enough we'll all be taking it back. Yeah, and we don't win or lose anything for finding it. Mina chimed in. Fine. Deku calmed down, putting his hands in his pockets. We should probably get back to Iida about this spot, right? Denki suggested, turning towards the group. They agreed and started to head back towards where everyone was going to meet up. Before all of them got too far, Chako felt a hand reach for her arm. She turned and saw Mina grinning, pulling her back. Hey, so? Mina said excitedly. What were you and Izuku doing searching together? Planning on asking him out a bit earlier. Why? Chako felt her face fill up with a blush yet again. And no, it wasn't anything like that. We just split up from our group earlier. Sure. Mina nodded, sounding unconvinced. Whose idea was it to split up? It was Aoyama. Aoyama knows, she asked, surprised. Yeah, Ichako said, breathing in to calm down. He's known for a while. She recalled back again to the practical tests. Somehow he had figured it out and without much trouble it seemed. She was unsure how he had known, but from that point on it wasn't any use denying it. The look the girl had on her face in response said it all. Why? Mina let out. He knew all this time and didn't say anything. Hey, hurry up, shouted Kirishima, who, albeit the last one in the group of boys, was still far ahead of them. The two girls let the conversation go and quickly ran through the snow to catch up. As they headed out, it didn't take long for the students to arrive back. Most of the groups were gathered around, talking to one another as they waited for everyone else. There were a few still out there, but not very many, perhaps one or two. The voting would start soon, and the sooner the better, the day having grown colder as time passed. Izuku glanced around and suddenly remembered about Aoyama and Shoji. How could he have forgotten about his friends like that? He was going to notify Chako about their problem, but then he spotted the two of them together standing around. Aoyama, Shoji. Izuku called out, getting their attention. It also got a hold of the Chakos as she followed the boy who was now walking towards them. Bonjour, Aoyama said happily. We're sorry for leaving you, he said, banging his head for a quick apology. Don't worry about it. A pair of lips formed on one of Shoji's arms. We were the ones who left you. Really, but enough. Did you happen to find a tree? Yeah, we found an amazing one. Ichako yelled, throwing her fist in the air. Magnifique. Some more time passed and finally were all of the groups together. Their searches were over and now could they begin the process of voting. After speaking with Mr. Kiki, Iida stepped into the middle of the students and called out to them. Class 1A. Please gather around as we begin. The students formed a crowd in front of Iida and let him speak. He spoke for a brief period of time before urging them all to follow. And they did. One by one did the class president let all the different groups show them the trees that they had found. All of them were quite splendid, and Mr. Kiki found himself impressed that these kids held such fine taste. When it came to Bakugo's group, Denki was the one to speak up. Oh, yeah, do we have a good one? We found it earlier over here with these guys. He pointed to both Izuku and Ichako, despite Bakugo's annoyed look on his face. The group led the others to the clearing where the tree laid. Upon walking up to it, they heard Samuo's "Nah, awesome, right?" Indeed, this was a wonderful find, Iida said. Then, he turned towards the class. Okay, Class 1A. We'll take our votes now. When I call out a tree you favor, I'd like you to raise your hand. Then, the voting finally took place. Some of the trees received few votes and some more, but the one that received the most was the one they were standing next to right now. Then that settles it. Class 1A, I present to you our Christmas tree. He motioned his arm towards it. The students cheered and clapped. Bakugo's group celebrated their victory together happily. Bakugo himself was also glad that their tree had been chosen, but still showed some annoyance upon having Izuku thrown in with them. He then turned to Mr. Kiki. Excuse me, sir, how much will this cost? The tall man raised an eyebrow and stroked his chin. Well, tell you what, I'll give you this one on the house. Are you sure? Iida asked, being caught off guard by his generous offer. Of course. Call this a gift to you, for treating my Mina ever so well. He replied, giving out a hearty laugh. Mina ran up and hugged him tightly. Ah, thank you, she said, squealing with joy. It's no problem, kiddo. Mr. Kiki patted her on the head, being careful of her horns, and looked at Iida. I'll have it delivered to you in a few days at max. Perfect. Iida joyously smiled, bowing his head. Thank you very much, sir. We are grateful for your kindness. He stood straight again and turned to Class 1A. Everyone, it seems that our search is over. We should all be heading back to the train station now. Please, follow me. Indeed, their search definitely was over. It had been quite a while since Class A had set out on their journey. Instead of it being a cold afternoon like it once was, it now seemed to be that of a cool evening. The sky was a bright red, and shortly the sun would be setting. Now, with the day ending, Class A set off for the train station, waving goodbye towards the kind man they'd met along the way. With the perfect tree having now been found and soon to be in their home, the students felt a wave of happiness overcome them. It was beginning to look a lot more like Christmas, and they still had so much time left to enjoy it. What will await them next? Who's to know, but you will soon find out. Chapter 8, December 20th. Begami. As the second day of winter break came upon us, we find a few of our young heroes gathered in the commons room. The students were hanging out with one another and enjoying their vacation. Some of them were really enjoying it, a few of them still asleep although it had become the afternoon. Time off from school or work was a great way to regain sleep that had been lost throughout the year, but too much of it could have you flying through your vacation before you knew it. Those who were awake sat on the couches, speaking to one another about plans they had for the future. When the new year is to arrive, I'll be traveling overseas along with my parents, Momo announced, smiling joyfully. Wow, yeah Momo, being rich sure sounds amazing, Toru said, placing her hands on her invisible cheeks. I wish I could be as lucky as you are. She began to go into a daze, daydreaming about how exciting her life would be with all the money her classmate had. It isn't that costly of a trip, Momo replied, trying to be as humble as she could. Although, it was admittedly difficult when you were raised in a mansion of all places. Come on, Mina, who had been leaning behind her over the couch, said. We know you're rich. She had a teasing smile on her face as she went to sit down. What's everybody else planning? Well, I don't have any special plans, Ichako said, sighing as she looked down towards the ground with a tired smile. You don't? Mina asked cheekily, raising an eyebrow at her. And no, not at all. Ichako's face became red as she looked back up at everyone. Then, she put her hands together and tried to correct herself. I mean I don't have any plans with my family. As she stumbled over her words, desperately trying to get out of this situation, the girl began to float into the air. You're floating, Saya bluntly said, watching as her friend rolled through the air in embarrassment. Hey, don't worry. It's only us here, Mina said, giggling whilst also trying to calm her friend down. Slowly Ichako came to her senses and glanced around the room. It really was only them there, so no one would have been able to hear about her special Christmas plans. She put her hands together and dropped down to the floor, sticking the landing. After that she went to sit back down. You really don't have any plans though? No, I don't, Ichako replied, scratching the back of her head. I've never been on vacation, especially over the break. What she said was true. Because of her parents' poor financial situation she had never been able to go anywhere. That didn't make her holiday break bad though, not at all. We mostly stayed at home. During New Year's a lot of relatives visit. Sayu placed a finger on her lip as she told everyone how her holidays went. We have a lot of people in my family, so our house is usually packed, ribbed. That sounds really hectic, Sue. Tor said, trying to imagine how crazy all of that must be. My family and I just sit together and watch movies. She glanced over towards Jir, who hadn't really said anything, being a bit distracted on her phone. Hey Jir. What do you do over the holidays? Me? Jir asked, snapping back to reality. She quickly looked around and saw that all of the girls were staring at her, curious about her holiday plans. There was a moment of silence before she answered. Turning away, the girl huffed as she fiddled with her earjacks. My family and I go caroling every year. I didn't take you as the caroling type, Momo said, smiling towards her. But I guess it isn't surprising your parents are musicians. Yeah. She replied, embarrassed. Oh? Do you sing Deku? Mina asked, eager to know. That's one of my favorites. Wow, everyone sure does have exciting things to do over the holidays. Achako tilted her head. Opening presents at home is still really fun. Tori chimed in, trying to make her feel better about her lack of plans. Suddenly, Mina, who was still trying to get info out of Jiro, turned to the invisible girl and grinned. Hey, that just gave me a good idea. She said, sitting back into the couch and letting out a squeal. What is it? Sayu said. Mina stood from the couch and headed for the undecorated Christmas tree, which had been set up in the corner of the room the previous night. What's a tree without some presents? She yelled out towards the girls, gaining their undivided attention. We should do one of those secret Santas where everyone gets a gift for each other. That sounds really fun. Achako happily replied, intrigued by Mina's idea. Exchanging gifts like that does sound exciting. Momo said, nodding her head at the pink girl. We should make a list of everyone's names and draw them from a hat. Tori suggested, her thought getting approval from those in the room. We'll have to wait until everyone is back. Sayu said, being mindful of those who wouldn't be present until later. Then we'll do it tonight. Mina declared, throwing her fist into the air. She sat down afterwards and they all began to work on this secret Santa project, writing out everyone's names on a sheet of paper. This plan that was being set into motion was just what they needed over holiday break. How could one have almost forgot the presents? They practically go hand in hand with the tree. Either way, this was going to be great. Mina could feel it. Meanwhile, on the other end of campus was Izuku. Our future number one was out for the day, meeting with All Might, the former number one and his mentor. They were seated in the staff room, and the boy had just been served some tea. UA staff room afternoon. So, you still haven't had any issues with One for All since then? No, ever since it first happened I still haven't been able to use it. Izuku said, shaking his head. He had his eyes fixated on his right hand, staring at his pale skin and the scars that covered the back of his palm. It had been a short time since what happened during the joint training with Class B had occurred. Even though it happened recently, the incident still felt as if it was happening in the present sometimes. He remembered how One for All had gone completely haywire and sprouted black tendrils that had gone berserk across the arena. He remembered the voices that spoke to him and revealed secrets that he, nor All Might, had ever known before. The mysteries of One for All began to unravel and still do since that day. All Might leaned forward, clasping his hands together as he looked towards his young pupil. Good. We still aren't sure what exactly activated this newfound power of yours, so we'll have to keep training to ensure it doesn't come out like it did last time. Izuku nodded his head in response, understanding the concern his master held. He was right, last time he almost hurt everyone, and he couldn't let that happen again. For some reason, he felt as if he had less control over this quirk than he did before, so that only meant he would have to work harder to understand it. Until then. All Might flexed, sprouting into his famous form and striking his signature pose. Enjoy your Christmas break. His voice sounded cheerful and filled with strength. It isn't too often that heroes get a chance to relax, so take this tea suddenly. He returned back to his former state and began coughing up blood. Ah, All Might. Izuku shouted with concern. UA dorm's evening. The sun had gone down for the day, and the wind had begun to pick up. All the students were now back inside the dorms, mingling around with one another as dinner time approached. Dude, I really need to find a place to use this. Denki said, holding up the snowboard that he had bought yesterday. He and his friends were gathered around on the couch. Zero leaned in, taking a better look at it. Yeah, this is a really cool board. It'd suck if you didn't get to use it before all the snow melts away. Why don't you try the hills up by the edge of the city? Satu suggested, slipping a piece of cake into his mouth afterwards. Hey, that's not a bad idea. Denki replied, lighting up at the sound of it. If you guys bring your sleds we can head up there tomorrow. Hey, I don't think we can do tomorrow, man. Zero said, scratching the back of his head. Ah, come on. Why not? Denki questioned, confused towards their rejection. Have you looked outside? It's pretty rough out there. I checked the weather network this morning, there's a blizzard warning going on. He turned his head and glanced outside the window, his friends following his direction. Outside there were large cold gusts of wind blowing harsh breezes of air, as the cold snow poured like no other. This morning it was not too bad, but it had escalated far too quickly for their liking, and by the next day would continue to rage on. From what Ciro had collected on TV, it was ill-advised to go outside tomorrow. What, seriously? Denki said, sighing as he put his head back into the couch. If only there was some kind of way to make it a little warmer. He rolled his eyes and looked around the room. Across from them was the half-and-half prodigy, Todoroki, sitting on the other sofa, pleasantly eating a bowl of cold soba by himself. A smirk came onto Denki's face as he called out to his classmate. Hey Todoroki. Todoroki lifted his head and blankly stared at Denki, slurping on his noodles. You could use your quirk to clear us a path and make it safe for us, right? He said, feeling hopeful. No? Todoroki replied in a cold, neutral tone. As he went back to eating, all of Denki's hopes shriveled up into dust and were blown away by the outdoor winds. Ugh, this blows. A defeated Denki sunk back into the cushions. I was really looking forward to testing this baby out. He sighed, rubbing the front design of his yellow snowboard. Well, guess we'll have to wait till it's all over to show you guys my awesome moves. Just then, they heard a small laugh escape a girl's mouth. Jer, who was walking by, happened to stop and comment on his bold statements. Awesome? More like awful to me. Hey, that's not true. Denki replied, shaking his head at her. I can snowboard. You told me you've never been before we bought that board yesterday. Jiro said with a rebuttal, calling him out on words he let slip yesterday during their lunch. Well, Denki said, smiling as he sat up and propped his elbows up on the back of the couch. I can learn. Hey, you know how to do it. Why don't you come with us after this storm and teach me? Jiro gave it a moment of thought before shrugging her shoulders. Sure. Then, she walked away. Meanwhile, on the other side of the room a few of the students were also gathered together, however not discussing anything they would be doing over the break, but school of all things. Ida, Ajiro, Tori and Tokoyami were speaking about their costumes to be specific. After the holiday break I'll be visiting Hatsum in the construction laboratory, Ida said, making odd hand motions as he spoke. My costume has not yet been adjusted to deal with the harsher weather conditions. If I were to be called upon for duty during this time I would not be properly equipped for the situation. He picked up a can of orange juice and began sipping on it, continuing to speak after he finished. How about all of you? The new additions to my costume keep me warm. Ijiro said, swallowing well-cooked rice. I might want something for my tail, though. His large tail softly wagged as Tor lightly patted. I hate the cold. Tor joined in. I'm always freezing in my costume. Perhaps you should research into a costume similar to our upperclassman, Mirio. Ida suggested. If your quirk is compatible, you could have clothing tailored using fibers of your hair that should retain its transparent properties while keeping you warm. Ooh, that's a great idea. Tor squealed, swaying side to side out of excitement. I have to ask him where he got his made. What about you, Tokoyami? Ijiro asked, looking at their friend who remained quiet. It has to be a little cold with only a cloak over your regular clothes. We're very in the cold. Tokoyami darkly replied, crossing his arms. The discussions went on and on around the room. All the students were settling nicely into their vacation as they sat around in the toasty commons area. They had been through a lot this year, and having this much downtime was a new, but nicer change of pace. Mina was not with the rest of them. She was found in the kitchen, up against a counter with a pink cap that had 2 holes for horns, as well as slips of paper. She had a bubbly expression on her face as she began placing them inside. Kirishima, who was on his way to get some water, spotted her and decided to approach the alien girl. Hey, what you doing? He asked, peering over her shoulder. Getting these names ready. Names? Yep. She turned to face him and held out the hat. Getting everyone's name in the hat. Oh, what for? If I told you it wouldn't be a surprise, would it, Aich? She raised an eyebrow and smiled in his direction, then giggled lightly. Kirishima felt a hint of unexpected dread hit his cheeks. He scratched the back of his head and returned the expression. Yeah, you're right. Say, when should we go ornament shopping? Ornament shopping? Yeah. Mina said excitedly, brightly grinning. It doesn't just become Christmas with a tree. We'll need lights, some wreaths to put up on the walls, hanging mistletoe. Mistletoe. Kirishima replied, thinking about the small thing hanging from the ceiling. Yeah, you have to kiss whoever you get caught with under there. She gave a flirty wink in his direction that made his sharp, manly face flush with a bright pink. To her, the mistletoe was the perfect addition to their dorm. It would certainly help some people get their desired kisses, and maybe one of her own. Ugh, isn't it so romantic, Mina said, clasping her hands together and sighed lovingly. I guess so. Kirishima scratched the back of his spiky head again, having what she said towards him on his mind. While he spoke, it just seemed to linger there, and he didn't really know if she meant something else. Did he want her to? I know you're not a big fan of that stuff, but isn't romance one of the most manly things ever? Huh? What you mean? Openly expressing how you feel about someone else without caring what others think, isn't that brave? When you put it that way, Kirishima was about to continue before Mina walked past him and headed into the living room. He followed close behind her. She headed straight towards the middle and briefly inhaled before speaking up and letting her voice out. Hey, Class A. She shouted, loud enough to grab everyone's attention. In the spirit of Christmas and gift-giving us girls, and I think it would be good if we all did something special. Special? Izuku said to himself, wondering what she meant by that. We're going to play Secret Santa, Mina announced, showing off the hat to everyone. I've placed all your names into this hat. She began to explain the rules of the game to the students. His attention were now focused onto her. You'll come up and choose one. Whatever you do, you'll be responsible for getting them a special Christmas gift. You can't share who you got with them. The group of kids glanced around at one another, curious as to who they may get and who may get them. Don't go too overboard with your gifts, and they have to be here under that tree by Christmas morning. So, who's first? She asked. Suddenly, Bakugo, who had been lazily resting on a chair, sat up and started to walk away. Count me out. He started to walk past everyone else and headed for his room. Mina pivoted and called out to him. Hey. If you don't choose a name, someone can choose yours. The pink girl said, trying to change his mind. I don't want your stupid gift. He wasn't having any of it, however, making his way up the stairs. Aw, come on Bakugo. Mina begged, frowning. Please. She tilted her head and tried her best to do a puppy dog face in hopes of persuading him. Bakugo looked over and glared at her for a moment, giving her a mean look. The two of them stared at one another, neither of them breaking character. Then, for the first time in his life, Bakugo gave up. Fine. He walked down from the stairs and over towards the hat, swiping a slip of paper. I'll play your dumbest game. Eh? Mina said, bouncing with joy. Okay, everyone else come get your slips. One by one the students came up, all reaching into Mina's hat and taking a piece of paper which bore a classmate's name on it. Luckily, no one got themselves, and when the choosing was finished, everyone sat down and checked their slips, eager to see who they received. Izuku opened his and was a little surprised to see who he would be getting a gift for. Your rocket read, in nice bold letters. The young man lifted his head and looked over at the girl, who was seated on the other couch. She too had just opened up her slip of paper, and had an equally shocked expression. Judging by her face, Izuku became curious as to who she received, and more so what to get her. He knew he had to get her something special. In a twist of fate, a Chako had received Izuku. To her, it felt as if the universe had rigged the outcome, however she wasn't unsatisfied by it, not at all. She looked up and briefly caught the eyes of Izuku. As they stared at each other for a second, their heads turned away and she could feel the heat come to her face, the girl's cheeks flushing a bright pink. What was she going to get him? She didn't know yet, but she knew it had to be something special. After the students had read their papers, and given some thought as to what they might give their Secret Santa partners, Mina wished them good luck, and they all headed upstairs, but not before cleaning up. Having no room in this world for a messy dorm. As they were heading up their staircase towards the rooms, there was chatter about who they received. Some of the boys were openly sharing who they got with one another. Izuku, Iida, and Shadow were not far behind them. It was Shadow who struck up the topic among the three of them. Hey, he said coldly, who did you receive? The two stopped midway through the halls and turned back to Shadow, who had a neutral expression, as he always did, on his face. Izuku was about to speak when Iida crossed his arms together like an X. I'm terribly sorry, Shadow, but I cannot allow you to know. He stood firmly and shook his head. I have sworn to follow the rules of this game and will keep who I have selected in secrecy to myself. Why? Shadow asked. If you received one of us then that's fine, but if you didn't it wouldn't risk anything to say it while we're alone. Iida started, thinking about what his friend argued. I admit you do make a fine point, but your paper is showing. Shadow interjected, reading what it said. Iida realized that the slip between his fingers was facing the wrong side. Seeing his mistake, he quickly prompted to fix it so no further damage could be done. It seems I failed already, Iida dramatically said, looking at the ground with shame. Shadow turned his head towards Izuku. Who did you receive? He asked. Oh, all I got. A Chako. Izuku confessed, placing his arms over his red face. I see. You should get her something special. He suggested, still having a blank expression. Why yeah, who did you get? Izuku lowered his arms, curious as to who his icy friend chose. Momo. He said openly, looking down at his slip. I don't know what to get her. Someone rich like her probably already has a lot. As someone who seemingly could buy or make anything they wanted, what would he get them that she hasn't gotten already? This question wandered in Shadow's head, feeling as if he had come up against a brick wall. Why you should get her something special too, Izuku said, offering his advice to him. But I'm sure she'd like what you got her. I agree. Iida said, nodding his head. As long as you put your heart into it, I am sure she would proudly accept whatever you decided to give her. Shadow stared at her written name, thinking about what they had to say. It was going to take some work, but if he thought about it and gave it some heart, then she would probably accept what he got her for Christmas. I'm sleepy. Azuma, let's get some rest, Iida said. The other two agreed and they all headed off to their rooms, going to get some well-deserved sleep. As they did, the storm outside continued to rage on, with seemingly no end in sight. All throughout the night while everyone slept, the striding winds blew through the air, and the snow fell like no tomorrow. The next morning, when Class 1A woke up, they were not surprised to see that the conditions of the weather had commissioned a blizzard warning, advising people not to venture outside. Rah! The cougar yelled, pressing his hands against the window. Damn blizzard. Fight me. Chapter 9 December 21st, War. It was a bright early morning in Musatafu. The snow outside was dropping from the sky at a heavy pace, clumping the streets full with large heaves packed tightly together. Much like the news had predicted, the blizzard had begun last night, and from where it stood now there was no end in sight. Those who unfortunately didn't have the liberty of sitting around today dreaded getting out of bed. People bent themselves backwards just to clear their driveways, driving to the long day of work ahead of them. The harsh weather did not stop the brave heroes that patrolled the city either from or above the streets, safely watching, ensuring that evil would not best them, for much like those kind souls, the villains did not rest either. Just another day, and all anyone could do was move forward through this hardship. Speaking of resting, Dinky was still resting. Sound asleep in his messy bed with his legs stretched past his blanket, Dinky slept like a baby, unaware of the horrors that would soon bestow him. Low snickering ensued from inside, but he remained dreaming even with the noise. This is cruel. A familiar voice said, feeling unsure of their actions and yet certain enough to continue. Dude, ruining my book was cruel. The other voice said, a slight lisp in his voice. It was a deluxe edition with a variant cover. That was some serious loot. You think he'll wake up? Nah, he's fast asleep. A hand tapped against Denki's stomach. The boy snarled, moving in his slumber, but still had himself lost in dreamland. The mysterious intruders finished their work and quickly left, making sure not to be in the vicinity when the time came. This was great, they thought. Albeit, a little cruel, but that didn't stop them from doing it. An hour later following the incident, Dinky opened his eyes with a sweet smile. He had a pleasant dream that helped move him through the stormy night. When he awoke he was faced with the peaceful side of his ceiling. Today is going to be awesome, he thought to himself. Time to get up. And so he did, or at least he thought. Ha! He said, confused. He tried again, but to no avail. What the hell? The young man shouted, shaking aggressively. There was something under his covers that kept him from sitting up. He tried to move his hands, but that proved to be just as futile as his previous actions. Now, Dinky was really confused and a little annoyed. Hey, what's going on here, buddy? Dinky rolled himself off the bed and landed on the floor. He hit the ground with a large thud. Turning himself, he now realized what had happened. Wrapped around his body was a thick coat of tape with purple balls everywhere. Oh, come on. He sighed. Well, at least he was off the floor. He went to stand up, yet nothing happened. Denki was now stuck to the floor. Commons room morning. Meanwhile, most of the students were gathered in the commons room. Those who were still asleep, save for Denki, who you could say was in a sticky situation. Iida was standing in the kitchen, preparing a hearty breakfast alongside a few other students. This is a really nice thing for you to do, Iida, Mina said, sneaking a small snack off of a tray of food that was done. Iida chuckled, continuing his work. There's no need to thank me, Mina, he replied, waving her off humbly. A president must always make sure that his class keeps their strength, and besides, when I was younger my mother used to do this for my brother and I on days like this. I believe all that I am doing is paying back the kindness that she showed me. Hearing such a sweet thing coming from someone so robotic really warmed her up. She let out a small awe before walking off. Despite such conditions, the heroes of today continued to push on. The TV that had been tuned to the local news displayed a young reporter, covered in scales across her face, bundled up with a very thick coat wrapped warmly around her. She was out on the streets, even in this weather, interviewing bystanders. It was then that a pair of familiar heroes came out on the corner of the screen. Off-cameraman, the one handling the equipment, notified the woman. She turned, glancing back, and then stared back at the camera with a jaw-dropping expression. The woman couldn't believe who she had just found on the street. What a lucky day. Quickly, they headed towards him. As they ran, the sound of the microphone bumping wildly against her fur coat could be heard. The young reporter scampered up to the two heroes who had just come out of a coffee shop together. Mount Lady and Kamui Woods, she exclaimed, a little out of breath. The heroes were caught off guard, Kamui especially. Why, hello. Mount Lady cuffed her hands together with a smile, quite pleased in seeing the cameras. The reporter, trying to catch her breath, held the microphone up towards him. HH. How are you two doing today? In this weather? We're doing great. It's cold beyond belief out here, but we aren't letting that stop us, she said in a higher-pitched tone with such enthusiasm present in her voice. A little unauthentic, but she was known to play it off for the cameras. A lot of heroes were focused on justice, much like her partner, Kamui, but she seemed more interested in fame at times. She practically basked in the spotlight whenever given the chance. Though, who could blame the woman? The attention was nice. Right, Kamui. I wonder if the rumors about them dating are true. Mina said casually, biting into a piece of toast. Perhaps, but it's their right to tell if they want. Momo replied. Reporters always seem so eager to pry into their personal lives. A hero's privacy is something that should be very valued. Aren't you even a little curious though, Momo? Toru asked. Ugh, they make such a great couple. She squealed in her seat. They're not the only ones I know who make a great couple. Mina smiled with a sly expression, raising her eyebrows at Momo, who now found herself becoming as red as a cherry. She placed her hands on her cheeks to hide the embarrassing blush that formed across her face. Toru became interested. You could not see it, but the curiosity shined all across her transparent eyes. What could her classmate possibly have meant? Was there a secret love affair that was going on right in these dorms? A forbidden romance that was bound to bloom under this blizzard, blossoming as soon as the sun showed its face yet again to cast its everlasting light into a world of darkness. Who could it be? I bet it has to do with Aoyama, she thought to herself. Mina laughed, turning back to the TV, while poor Toru was kept out of the loop. Momo looked away in an attempt to push that idea her friend had planted out of her head. The idea, however, did nothing of the sort as her head turned. There, standing by the wall with the phone in his hand was Todoroki. He stood silent, speaking to someone on the other line, unaware of Momo. When her eyes fell upon him, Momo felt her heart stop. For a moment there, it felt as if it ceased to beat entirely. Momo's bright face got warmer the longer she looked. As she stared, a feeling in her stomach started to erupt. Just what was this feeling? As if drawn like cursive on a sheet of paper, his name flashed in her head. Maybe Mina. Momo? A voice called her name, pulling the girl back into reality. It was Iida, who was still standing in the kitchen. Are you able to help carry this? He asked, a tray full of food that had been laid out on the counter by Satya, who was assisting him. Yes, I'll be right there. She stood up from the sofa, walking towards him. What was that now that she just experienced? It felt like time had slowed down, or stopped completely, and the woman had been so out of it that she didn't consider anything else around her. More specifically, it occurred when faced with Todoroki. Is this how it felt to fall no? She tried to tell herself. This wasn't anything more, just her friend's idea getting into her head. No. Surely, she didn't feel that way about her classmate, he was just a colleague. A sweet, thoughtful and admittedly handsome colleague, but one nonetheless, and yet her heart lit brighter the more he swam in her head. I drew Kirishima's room afternoon. Hey. I don't think you can do that. Kirishima called out to Tokoyami, who had just used Dark Shadow to remove a Jenga block with perfect precision. The Birdman had his arms crossed, and didn't seem to take much notice towards his friend's concerns about legal moves. Izuku had the rule book in his hands and was carefully reading through, running his fingers along each word. He was checking for anything relating to what Kirishima was accusing Tokoyami of. I don't think it's against the rules, he said, continuing his inspection. Whatever, Bakugo scoffed. Hurry the hell up so I can win. That's not really how this game is played. Ijiro interjected, scratching the back of his head. Bakugo growled and turned to shout at him. You trying to say I'll lose, Minky Tail? In his fit of blind rage, Bakugo furiously slapped the table with his palm. He had completely let go of the fact that the tower of blocks was set neatly in the middle of it. It came crashing down in an instant, the pieces spilling all over Kirishima's floor. Fuck. Kirishima began picking them up, the latter three of the boys going by his side to aid. How about we play something a little less messy this time? The redhead suggested as he placed the remainder of the blocks inside the small metal tin. Bakugo shook his head in response, standing up. I'm not going to sit around playing any more games with these losers. He clenched his fists in another, although much smaller, fit of rage. I don't want to be stuck in here all day either. I'm going outside. Wait, Kakin. Izuku said as his friend headed for the door. You saw the news. It's not really safe to be outside with this weather. He's saying I'm too weak to handle some snow. A small explosion formed in his palm as he shouted over his friend. As far as he was concerned, steamed broccoli had just hit a low blow. He let out a huff and calmed down, pocketing his hands. Besides, what's the big friggin' deal if I go out for a minute? The longer I'm stuck in here with all of you, the more I feel like leaving. The ravaging storm outside provides perfect ambience for basking in the darkness, battling the endless storm within, Tokoyami said. His statement, that was so left field, caused everyone in the room to cease speaking and stare at him in silence. Concern filled the air, collectively swimming in everyone's minds, even from Bakugo. A moment later things went back to normal. Ah, come on, Bakugo. Can't be that bad, we were having some fun, right? Kirishima replied, looking around for support. The three boys nodded. All of them, except for Bakugo, seemed to have had some fun, even if it wasn't the most enticing thing. Surely, he must have felt the same way to some degree, right? His crimson glare said it all. Guess he really didn't like Jenga. Kirishima let out a smile and placed a hand on his buddy's shoulder. Well, alright. If you're going outside then I'll come too. I mean, it can't be that bad, can it? Even if it is, it's nothing we manly bros can't handle. 2 floors down, in front of Izuku's door was Chako. She was standing there with a stumped look. Her eyebrows were furrowed, and her peachy smile was now a frown that said, "What do I do?" She had been here for a few minutes now. Originally, the girl came by to knock, but when nothing came out of it and he wasn't there, she took a step back, and then became encapsulated by the barrier between her and his room. There was something on her mind, something that had been lingering since last night, that she couldn't seem to shake off. Thinking she was alone, Ichako did not even notice the pair of eyes that were staring her down. "Bonjour, mon ami," said a graceful voice. The girl jumped, her cheeks turning a bright pink as she let out a small yelp. "Did I scare you?" It was Aoyama. "Aoyama," Ichako replied, almost in a scolding manner. "You really scared me." "I know." Aoyama stood next to Izuku's door, laying his eyes upon it just as she was previously. "Are you waiting for someone special?" "Huh?" Ichako's face became more flushed. "And no. It's not like that." "Oh? Then perhaps you are out here getting ideas on what to give him?" he asked, winking playfully. The girl became flustered, but she was also so surprised at just how accurate the French boy was. No secrets she had ever seemed to be kept from him. It was a mystery with how perceptive he is, who could tell what else he knew. "Make sure what you choose is c'est magnifique." Just then the sounds of footsteps from upstairs caught her attention. There was quite a number of them. Noisy, hard stomping. Coming down the stairs was the group of boys that just finished Jenga. Both Bakugo and Kirishima showed up bundled in thick coats, preparing for their escapade into the unknown outside. As Izuku approached she felt herself freeze up. It was like she couldn't move all of a sudden. Frozen in frost. "Uraka," he said with a smile. "Oh, and Aoyama. What are you two doing standing out here?" "Deku. I was heading downstairs to eat, mon ami," Aoyama replied, walking off with a knowing smile on his face. "Au revoir." He left in a hurry, moving faster than the rest of the boys who went down the stairs, leaving Izuku and Ichako alone. Ichako gritted her teeth, thinking about what he had just done. The green-haired young man looked back at the girl, but couldn't seem to stop the large smile that came across her face. "He's in a hurry. What are you doing out here?" Come on, Ichako," she thought to herself. "I was looking for you." "Why you were?" he replied, a tint of pink finding its way along the side of his face. "Sorry, I was up in Kirishima's room, playing some games." "It's no big deal. Please, help." "What did you want to see me for?" Great, now Ichako was really frozen. If a ship were to hit her, it would most certainly cause another Titanic. Ichako. Well, Deku. I was wondering if you were gliding come over with every animal because of very news and you just wanted to know if you will join the mornet. "Oh?" Izuku simply replied. Was she really this concerned about whether or not he'd be there? Almost if in the third were with the very news that didn't have somebody could probably escape maybe shout of Hassan at Asur and Behavian. Their mouths ran at the speed of a bullet train, and somehow, they could still understand one another. Hula have you now remember and and you but to give you that way to had us let the bit before you felt a little bit didn't disappear distance and even some words just look here. "I'll see you tomorrow." The two of them finished in unison, exchanging a small nod before running off. While Ichako went back downstairs, Izuku took a different path, retreating into his room. He shut the door behind him with his back pressed against the wall. Also, it was against his Silver Age All Might poster, to which he then stepped away from as not to crumple it. From there he let the emotions all out, the red spilling from his face. What was that? He'd never been that flustered around Ichako before. Was it because Christmas peered around the corner, and wait, did she ask him out somewhere maybe? He didn't know. The boy shook his head in disbelief. Why would he even think that? His friend was just curious, nothing more. Perhaps this idea of him confessing was bringing upon a sense of anxiousness, carefully watching what she said, and what he said too. Was he talking too fast? It all just felt so slow to him. It was true that Izuku had some doubts about saying how he felt to Ichako. Actually, that was an understatement. He'd never done this before and it could go so many different ways. There was nothing in his notebook on romance. Still, despite this fear he pushed on and was still going to go through with his promise, for him. When it happened he wanted to make sure it was perfect, and that meant getting the perfect gift for her, something he still hadn't come up with yet. He knew Chako quite well, they'd been close friends since the beginning of the year, and he had a good idea of what she liked, but he wasn't certain of where he would go shopping. He had 4 days to figure it out. Izuku let out a sigh. It would be better if he didn't go alone. Shadow stared at the screen of his phone. He was waiting for a text from his sister, one that was yet to be received. Their chat log read as: Shadow Todoroki, hey. Do you know when mom will be available to visit next? Find me Todoroki. Sorry, Shadow, I don't know, but I'll check and get back to you. Shadow Todoroki, thanks. It had been a while since he had sent out that last text, quite a few hours. He knew Fayumi was busy, but a part of him wished she would hurry up and tell him. For a while he had been trying to schedule a meeting, but lately the hospital had been so busy, and unfortunately he was not able to visit. Going for long periods like this without seeing her, sure, in the past he had done it before. Shadow had not seen his mother for years before these past few months, but now things have changed. A lot of things changed recently, and some of it was thanks to Izuku, who he would always be grateful to have as a friend. For a long time it felt that everything in his life was doomed to stay the same. His father would not take responsibility for his actions and condemned Shadow to following in his footsteps, Shadow resenting him. The long nights where a family ate away from one another at dinners Fayumi prepared for them, not seeing his mother. All of that and more. Christmas, a day full of love and companionship, transformed to hatred and isolation. He did not hate the holiday itself. What it stood for was nothing that made him a Scrooge. It was merely his Christmas that did not bode well with his heart. It was just how his life was, and as much as Shadow found himself hating it, no great change came. It had become a routine. Stagnant and gray, with Shadow stuck in a cycle of brooding. That was, until the time high school had arrived. Now, however, there was color. Over the past year after arriving to UA he gained so much experience in being a hero, regaining his passion to fulfill his dreams, and setting aside all this anger for something better. Love, with the friends he had made. Never did he imagine himself being so happy this time of year alongside so many other people who he could be happy with. It was nice. And yet, this situation was bringing him down. Whatever, he thought, putting his phone away. I can't do anything now. Out of the way. A familiar voice shouted. One too familiar. It was Bakugo, strutting through the commons room. He was dressed in a thick dark coat with purple sleeves, and sported a white knit hat. The young man had bumped into Satu as he turned the corner. He was carrying a tray of cookies that had been baked alongside Iida's generous breakfast. He lost balance briefly, the cookies almost meeting their untimely doom, save to say for a stroke of luck. Whoa, be careful. Satu said, scolding him for his recklessness. Bakugo was about to fire back when he noticed the cookies. What's that for? Oh. Some of us were making breakfast, and I thought I'd do my part in helping out by baking these. You want one? No? He replied, walking off. Where are you even going dressed like that? Satu asked. Outside. You coming? Maybe later, after all of these are handed out. He went the opposite way, leaving Bakugo to stomp into the commons room where most of the class still sat, sitting by the TV, and eating their delicious meal, as a rerun of a game show played on TV. Hey. Mina said, waving with a smile. Where are you headed? Out there. I can't stand being in here all day with the likes of you. He huffed, heading for the door. As he went for it there came Iida, sliding out from the kitchen in front of him in a wide stance. Wait. Iida guarded the door. I can't allow you to just go waltzing out wherever you'd like during a snowstorm. Look, I'm not even going to leave the walls, alright? He said, his words being that of a negotiator, but his natural temperament speaking in that of demands. Move it or lose it, Four Eyes. Either way, I'm going out. Yeah, man. Come on, just let us through. Kirishima joined in, approaching while he too wore winter gear. It's not like being out there will kill us and we're not even going far. He was going to rebuttal, and before the words had left him there came along someone he did not expect to be joining these two. In a long green coat, strapped with a pair of matching goggles set on the front of his forehead was Izuku. Midoriya. Oh, hey. Kirishima turned. You changed your mind. I thought about it, and to be honest, I wouldn't mind getting some fresh air either. Hey, Shadow said, pushing off the wall. If you're going out there, count me in. Iida stared down the four of them. It was of no use, he was outmatched, and even if he put his foot down they wouldn't stop until those doors were open. He sighed and stepped aside. Fine, but all that I ask is of your safety. Yeah. Bakugo pushed open the doors and they all headed outside. The weather, as expected, wasn't great. As the news had broadcasted, a storm was surely brewing. A flurry of snowflakes whizzed by in thick clots, while cold winds brushed up against the back of their heads. It was freezing, and they'd only been out there for a few minutes. So, Kirishima said, looking around with his hands burrowed within his coat pockets, what are we doing? The fields of the surrounding campus were empty. Besides the lot of them, there was no one outside, nor were there any tracks to spot, but they could have just as easily been covered by the storm had they not existed. Bakugo was knelt over with his head facing down at the white ground. Bakugo. There's not much we can do out here. Izuku replied as he began to shiver, a part of him regretting coming outside. He wondered, what would the weather be like tomorrow? Would it be good enough to go sledding? Achako was counting on them going together, and so was he. Sledding, with a girl. Well, the whole class would be there too, but still, maybe he'd be able to get some more alone time with her. He pictured them sharing a sled, her arms wrapped tightly around him, zooming down a steep hill and spinning out at the bottom. They'd land in an awkward position, she would be laying right above him. How close they would be. Izuku suddenly shook his head, throwing those thoughts out from within. He He felt his face become warm, and it became pretty apparent that he was blushing like a tomato. Quickly, he picked up some snow and packed it against his cheeks to cool off. What a bad idea, now he was incredibly cold. His shivering worsened as Bakugo finally spoke up. Look, I came out here to get some air. If you're too weak to handle it out here, then screw off and go back inside. Well, came a voice from elsewhere. The boys turned to face it, and there, strolling through the snow, was the pompous blonde, setting his sights on the group with a sly grin. If it isn't Class 1A's shooting stars gathered out in the snow. Manama. Oh, it's that guy from the other class. Shadow said. You remember Do, how I'm flattered. He replied, throwing his hand up against his heart with a dramatic flare. There was malice swirling within his sea blue eyes that made them appear as red as blood. He always had such an antagonizing look on that sharp face of his. Behind him, there were two other students. Class 1B Rep, Kendo, and recommendation student Satsuna. What the hell are you doing here? Bakugo stood, teeth grinding against one another. Ah, Bakugo. What a pleasant surprise. He let out a cackle. I was just standing outside when I spotted all of you in a circle doing nothing. From the looks of your shaking bodies, I'd say I caught you at a right time before you went back in. In the presence of 1A, Manama's wrath never failed to elevate to greater heights. It was as if he practically lived to spite all of them. Bakugo huffed, seething with rage. Hey, control yourself, Kendo said, trying to hold him back. Say, I've got an idea. Since you're out here doing nothing, how about I give you something better to do? You talking a challenge? Kirishima asked, intrigued. Anything you throw at me, I'll beat you. The fiery blonde of 1A screamed. The animosity between the two of the first year's most competitive students was real. Their energy coursed through their boiling veins and practically bled out right into the snow. Of course. Right here, right now, Class 1B proves their superiority to 1A in a snow battle. Are you really sure you want to do this? Kendo asked, growing nervous of the tension building between the group. Ah, come on, it'll be fun. We'll get a good chance to show them just how great we are. Sasuna chimed in, encouraging their rivalry. Is it? Bakugo laughed as explosions fired from the palm of his hands. Fine, I'll wipe the floor with your whole damn class and run them back inside. If you want a challenge, then bring it on. Kirishima smirked. He was up for anything. Midoriya, Todoroki, you'll back us up, right? Yeah, count me in. Me too. Izuku readied himself for the great battle that was about to begin between them. It was not long before their small battle of rivalry had evolved into a full-on, large-scale guerrilla snowball war. A lone snowball, thrown by Sasuna, splattered against the front window and caught the attention of Class 1A. What was that? Ichako had asked as she turned towards the window. Hey, said Mina with her face pressed up against the glass. It's Bakugo and everyone else. They're fighting against Class B in a snowball fight. It seems they're outnumbered too, Kiro. Noted Sayu. Yes, indeed, a few more of the students from the opposite class had come for reinforcement and now to lay a siege upon the young men, who defended bravely, but were still outnumbered by their enemies. Those cheaters. She huffed, pouting with her cheeks. As Mina began to head outside, Ida popped his head out and called out to her. Where are you going? Going to help out our boys. Come on, who's with me? A few of the students cheered her on, and they too quickly strapped up, much to their president's dismay. I still believe that all of us shouldn't be going out in this harsh weather, especially over a snowball fight. Oh, lighten up a little. Mina gave a toothy smile as she patted his back. Besides, the class president has to look out for his class, right? Don't tell us you're just gonna leave them out in the snow. In response, Ida repositioned his glasses with a sharp look. No, you're right. He replied, now with a more noble posture. Regardless of the situation, the class president must look out for his fellow students. Apart from that, the principles of a hero lie with those who are willing to stand bravely in the face of adversity, no matter how grave the danger may be. Ida, with his will not forgotten within his heart, geared himself up and lead charge alongside Mina into the battlefield, as their classmates followed next to them, their hearts connected and ready for the unknown. Manama had just barely dodged a snowball when he spotted the near entirety of Class A rushing out onto the field. Ho, what's this? He cried out, laughing at the many students. You really needed this many reinforcements. For a moment the battle ceased as the rest of them turned to face their allies. Ichako. Izuku said, surprised as she, along with everyone else, was here. Don't worry, Deku. The girl reassured as she held a tightly packed snowball. We're here to help. While the rest of them were delighted to have their friends standing courageously next to them, Bakugo was not impressed, as noted by the visible rage in his eyes. Hey! He shouted loudly, his head tilted right up to the sky as he carried out his voice. What the hell are you doing here? I didn't ask for help. Sure seemed like you needed it. Sasuna snickered. We saw that you were being overwhelmed, Momo said with a gentle smile. None of us planned to stay inside and leave you out here by yourselves when we could be here to aid you. Well, that's really nice of you, Kendo said, always being one to admire strong camaraderie. But now this isn't much of a fair fight. How about we even the odds then? Mina replied. Class A versus Class B in a full-out battle with forts and everything. Okay, sure. That sounds great. We'll gather up who we can and take 10 minutes to build forts. It's a clean battle, so no quirks allowed, got it. The classes came to an agreement towards their rules. Kendu then turned and headed back to her dorms to gather the rest of the troops, while Class A waited patiently, fueling the spark of a nice rivalry to a passionate wildfire. UA Dormitory Commons Room afternoon. Back inside, curled up by the TV with a cup of instant cocoa was Jir. She had her knees pushed up against her chest, and was half focused on whatever story the news channel was running with. She declined the offer to help, not because she didn't want to help, no, don't get it wrong, she was just taking some time to search the internet regarding shopping. Where could I get something they'd like? Jira thought you herself, speaking about her Secret Santa. On top of searching through the city, she was also double-checking her recent purchases and tracking their movement, ensuring that they would be arriving just on time. The girl was happy to see that was still the case, you could never know during holiday season. She had saved up some money to buy her parents some music equipment. Her father, a sleek new pair of wireless headphones in his favorite colors, so that he was able to reflect on his compassing anywhere in the house. As for her mother, a brand new guitar that had her initials written in, since her previous instrument had broken. It was a hefty amount spent on the both of them, but it was the least she could do, and isn't Christmas about giving anyways? That, and kindness, along with family, something she appreciated dearly. Thump. A loud crashing sound sent Jiri jumping from the sofa. Quickly, she turned to see where such a noise had come from. Lying on the ground, still tangled up in a web of tape and cotton was Denki. Ow, he groaned, his face slanted against the floor. Hey. Jiro said, now standing over him. Hey. He replied, happy to see her. Are you alright? She asked. Not really, Denki shook his head. I'm a little tied up right now. The two of them then bursted out laughing. Jiro used her ear jacks to slice through the tape and free the boy from his chains. Ugh, thanks. I haven't been able to eat all day. The young man opened the cabinet and took out a cup of instant ramen. As he prepared it, he looked back to her and smiled. What would I ever do without you? What? Jiro became red at his words. You know, he continued, shoving the well-done noodles in his mouth. You're like always there when I need you. I don't know what you're talking about, she said, crossing her arms and evading his gaze. You don't. He chuckled, slurping up another noodle. The man continued to talk even with such a full mouth. Every time I'm looking for support, you're always there. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't have that sick snowboard. You bought that on your own. She narrowed her eyes. Yeah, but you helped me pick it out. And I mean, you decided to come along to go sledding so I can learn how to use it. He added on, nearly done his breakfast. I did that because we're friends. Just friends? Denki asked, cheekily. His friend's face turned a dark shade. She was completely caught off guard by his statement. Just what was he insinuating? What are you trying to say, Kaminari? She demanded in a flustered tone, glaring directly at him. His demeanor shifted, no longer acting so nonchalant. He said nothing, going silent as his body perched up against the side of the counter, his hands placed behind him and feeling the cold marble. The boy's head was lowered to the ground, and now it appeared that he was the one avoiding a pair of eyes. He started, though stopped midway, as if he was trying to find the right words. I just think you're special, that's all. There was another moment where none of them spoke. Neither his nor her mouth moved to describe how they felt, perhaps because they could not find the words, or maybe they couldn't stand with them, but they didn't have to say anything. Their faces said it all. Then, finally the silence was broken by the blonde boy with a light smile. Jir. Denki said softly as she waited for him to finish. Do you got your board ready for tomorrow? How could he act so cool after that? Is everyone clear on the plan? Izuku asked. The boy was on one knee, hidden underneath the safety of a snowy shelter. As clear as I can be. Tor said, saluting. Okay, good luck. The small group split up and wandered off towards their stations. Izuku shuffled on his knees through the narrow trench that had been dug. In the 10 minutes that had elapsed, both classes had built spectacular forts. Courtesy of Kirishima, Class A's was complete with a clean tunnel system that lead along tall walls and branches off to loop around their frozen sanctuary. I can't believe that we were able to build this. Izuku thought to himself as he navigated up to the front lines. That's UA for you. Going above and beyond, plus ultra. The boy had not seen much of Class B's structure, as he had been too busy helping out Satu reinforce the walls of their smaller shelters, but from what he did see, it looked quite similar to theirs. However, Class B's base resembled more of a fortress, with walls that pushed further down the enemy lines, in contrast to Class A's, which had a solid wall in the front, and smaller walls spread behind their own. Izuku made it to the front lines where he was greeted by Tsuyu, Siro, and Sayu. Are you ready, Midoriya? He nodded in response, picking up a snowball from the pile. Yeah. Everyone's in position. He glanced around, someone was missing. Where's Mina? She's up there meeting with Kendo. Sayu said, extending her finger to point out past their base. Just as she had told him, Mina and Kendo were up front in no man's land, waiting for time to be over, which it almost was. I hope this doesn't take too long, Kiro. The girl shivered. Frogs were not meant for this kind of weather. Don't worry, we'll be back before the sun even starts to go down. Zero reassured with a confident smile. Not a moment later did Mina scare them all by charging around the corner, taking quick cover behind their wall. It started. She shouted to everyone. Then it began, the battle to end them all. Snowballs quickly pelted through the air, smashing into each other's walls like cannons on the side of the ship. Those that were unfortunate enough to not be hidden behind cover became an easy target and had a large barrage of snow shooting for them. The battle raged on throughout the afternoon, taking much longer than expected. About halfway in, trouble started to arise from within. Shoot, Mina said, picking up the last snowball. This is the last one we've got. I'll be back. Okay? Izuku replied, narrowing his brows. A wave of nervousness came over him. It was the uncertainty of his survival that kept him at edge. The front wall had taken considerable damage, and now they were out of ammo. The snow around them was scarce, having used most of it for the construction of the walls, only some decent ones, though even they had to be held together by cold grass. It was rough out here, and it had gone so wrong so fast. Zero and Sayu were no longer with him. On a recon, Zero was hit, and Sayu, due to her quirk, the girl's longevity for the weather was severely hindered, and she had to withdraw for her had taken considerable losses, but they were not the only ones who had taken a hit. On the other side, Kendo had just been eliminated. She had protected her fellow classmates, but to no avail. Ibarra came right after. Her pacifist shtick was of no use on this land, for this was one of war, not words. Their walls too had taken considerable damage, half their outer barricades destroyed, forcing them to recoup inside their inner walls. Monoma was not one to let up and continue to fight. I have to beat Class A. He told himself, gritting his teeth. I will beat Class A. It was this strive for victory that kept him going in dire times, hopefully leading him to victory. On the other side of Class A's outer wall, in a corner that had not been penetrated stood Shadow, Ida, Shoji and Momo, relaying suppressive fire. Momo sighed. This plan she had helped construct was falling through. If only she could use her quirk during this battle, surely they'd be more well-equipped to fight. All of their quirks would be of great help, especially Shadow's. In a second he could make them a giant ice barrier that would be nigh impenetrable. That was Shadow. Shadow was very resourceful. Shadow was very skilled. Shadow was about to get hit. Shadow was about to get hit. Shadow. Momo cried out. She did the only sensible thing she thought of and tackled her classmate at full speed. They hit the snow, rolling around in the white ground. The boy grunted upon his impact from the unexpected landing. Momo stopped and stared at him, hoping that she had made it in time. Aoi Rosu. Shadow spoke in a quiet voice, wincing. Is it you? Are you okay? She frantically asked, hoping that he hadn't been hurt because of her. I'm fine. He reassured. Thank you. Momo smiled, relieved of his condition. Right in the nick of time, just before it came to them, Momo had successfully saved him. Had she hesitated, or been unsure of her actions, things would have turned out a lot differently for them, and for that she couldn't bear the thought in mind. While she took a moment and let herself breathe, Shadow stared at her. The girl had really been worried, he could tell. There was a twinkle in her eye, one that in this light seemed to captivate him. Yoi Rosu. He said her name again, prompting her curiosity. Shadow was compelled in some strange way, and so he gently lifted his hand, placing it right on her cold cheek. Momo flushed as the boy's sudden movement surprised her. What was he doing? Despite her questions, Momo was drawn to Shadow, and she believed that he too was feeling the same way. Inch by inch their faces closed the distance between them, until there was little left. Perhaps, in this moment, they were about to make a move, had Momo not noticed the snow smoking beneath them. As Shadow, you're on fire. What? Shadow fell out of his trance, moving to the side as Momo slid off him. Quickly, he forced himself to deactivate his quirk. She was right. Beneath them, the snow where they once sat in was gone, melted away into water. How could this have happened? Shadow was dumbfounded for an explanation, and now felt ashamed of this occurrence. He was so ashamed that just now, he had almost completely forgotten what happened. Ida, who had spotted them still there, called out to them. Todoroki, Yoi Rosu. He said, motioning towards himself with his arm. I need you to help us make more. He was standing next to Shoji, who using all 6 of his arms, it wasn't counted as using his quirk, had managed to become a force to be reckoned with, rapidly firing snowballs as if he were a chain gun. The two of them nodded and headed their way, leaving the incident behind. Shoji felt awkward as they approached. Why? Unbeknownst to them, he had seen the entire thing. Meanwhile, back at the front lines with Izuku, he patiently waited for Mina, who had not yet returned. Where is she? He thought to himself, unable to view her location. The green-haired young man had been here for quite a while now by himself, and worse of all, with no ammo still. Snowballs still pelted by here and there, his opponents throwing them carelessly, as if they had no regard whether they hit him or not. Was it a distraction? No, he disregarded those thoughts as he took another look at the wall. The sides next to him had been split, and now where he stood was a lone wall between two small gaps. If only he had something to throw, he could lob it in those windows. A hand reached out with a snowball, just what he needed. Thank you, he said, taking the offer. Before he lined up his arm, Izuku did a double take. Bonjour, mon ami. It was Aoyama, and with a handful of snowballs. Aoyama, he said with a smile, over the moon to see him. Where did you come from? That I can't reveal, he winked. Did you think I would leave you here alone? I'm glad you're here, this is just what I needed. You're really reliable, Aoyama. Thank you. Izuku was filled with glee, a dim light of hope in a dark world that was Aoyama, close friend and confident. He was right where he needed with what he wanted. An opportunity to turn the tables, all thanks to him. Do not thank me, mon ami. That is what friends are for. Izuku gripped the ball tightly in his hands and turned the corner, curving the snowball out into the battlefield. When he looked back, Aoyama was nowhere to be found. Gone, like the winter wind. His sack of snowballs that had been delivered was the only thing of what remained towards his presence. Speaking of what remained, the other side of their wall was torn down. Ejiro, Toru, Mineta and Bakugo were left taking cover behind a shelter that was rapidly decreasing in size. They were being annihilated by an aerial storm. It never seemed to end. Bakugo was fuming at how this had taken such a turn of events. He hated being stuck here, like sitting birds in a nest as a larger predator circled them, waiting for the inevitable. They just won't give up, Ejiro said. Bakugo had enough. He got on his knees and started to crawl out. Bakugo, his peers shouted. What are you doing? Bakugo snarled. It's pretty clear they're targeting me. As much as a pain to say, his loud personality was the reason the four of them were stuck here. They have to stop firing, and when they do I'm moving up. After that, all of you get the hell out of here. He clenched his fist. I'm going to crush those weak bastards and show them who the strongest is. I'll come with you, Ejiro said in response. Your death. Bakugo laughed. We need to let everyone know there's a change of plans. Ejiro turned to Mineta. Mineta, I need you to relay that to Mina and the others. Can I trust you to do that? I don't know if I'll be able to make it. Mineta cowered. Mineta, please. Ejiro begged. We're relying on you. All of us. Mineta looked down at the ground, at his own prints that had been placed into the snow for far too long. He thought about what Ejiro had to say. Was he really the one they all needed? It appeared that way. Mineta gulped, lifted his head at Ejiro and nodded. Okay, he said. Don't worry, I'll save you all. A brief sound of nothing leapt Bakugo to his feet, rushing forward towards a death mission, Ejiro not far behind. Mineta took the opportunity and zoomed as fast as his little legs could carry him across the battlefield. He covered his head and yelled as snowballs soon started to fly once again. Mineta saw an entrance in one of the trenches, a shelter. He dived straight for it and slid right through. Mineta Kota said. He was knelt over next to Satu. The two of them were repairing this busted-up igloo. No time to talk. I need to wait here for a moment. I don't think we have a moment. Satu replied as they came hurtling in, destroying the walls. Mineta squealed. The repair team's efforts were of no use, there was just too much. The shelter was collapsing within itself, the damage sustained was far more than they could handle. Mineta, you need to go. Kota said, holding the walls up. I can't hold this forever, and you're the only one small enough to fit through the hole now. Run, Mineta. Mineta had no time to give a faithful goodbye to either of them, the men that gave him his second chance, the men who saved him. He sprinted, crawling under the snowy rubble and squeezed through outside. Just as he did, the shelter caved in, taking both of his friends in the process. He wanted to mourn, but there was no time for tears. Izuku gasped as a snowball grazed by his shoulder. That was close. He had what he needed, but he wasn't sure if he could withhold them for much longer. Then, a familiar voice suddenly called out to him. Deku. It was a Chako. She quickly took cover at the part of the wall left to the gap. He tossed her a snowball. I saw how close it was. We have to be careful. Yeah, they keep coming. Not for long, she said confidently. We'll flush them out, right, Deku together, they fought valiantly alongside one another. Mina. Mineta shouted, making his way to her, Kirishima and Tokoyami, who also had been bravely holding their ground against Class B. So much for being right back, you could say. Mina. They've moved up. Mineta who? Bakugo and Ejiro, there's been a change of plans. They wanted me to tell you Mineta was cut off by a snowball sniping him right in the head. Horrified, they looked as he fell to the ground. We can't stay here, we have to help. She ordered, hitting his chest. Tokoyami, you too. Ichako and Izuku continued to fight as a pair, their strength holding the weight of the wall on their shoulders, as long as their hearts stayed connected. We're pushing them back, Izuku said, admiring their efforts. No matter how much they endured, together they would continue to fight, to bring them all to victory. Nothing was going to take away their hope. Absolutely nothing, except wham, was the sound Izuku heard as snow splashed against Ichako's coat. Deku, she screamed, falling to the ground. The boy hurried towards her, ignoring the rest of the fire that was raining down upon him from above. Ichako, he yelled at the top of his lungs. Izuku swiftly came to her side, kneeling down next to the girl. Had she been hit desperately, he looked at her for an answer. This couldn't be true, he thought to himself, shaking his head. No, it couldn't be. This wasn't happening. She had to be alright. I. He tried to speak, but all that left his mouth was her name. Ichako. Deku, she said weakly, smiling at him. I think it's over. No, don't say that. Izuku said. No, he begged, but this was not a place for bargaining. Even if it was, the deal was far too gone for him to grasp in his hands. It's not over. Deku. Please. She coughed, but still with a smile on her face. Don't be sad. I'm sorry, Izuku whispered. I'm sorry I wasn't able to save you. Ichako turned her head and looked out past the walls. The setting sun shined a bright ray of light down to where she lay gracefully in the snow. A sunset, huh? As the girl had pictured it all coming to an end. It's okay. I'm happy. The girl started, a moment passing before she could continue. Happy that I met you. She gently closed her eyes. Ichako was a little tired. While Izuku sat in mourning, he watched as her body floated into the sky, back where she belonged. Hey. Monoma bopped his head out from where he had until now remained hidden. She can't use her quirk. Ah, sorry. Ichako apologized, deactivating it. It's time this ends. Izuku Midoriya stood tall and proud with a clenched fist. There was a spark in his emerald eyes. A newfound determination, found by the bitter defeat of his close friend, set him on a new path. He would not succumb to anger or sadness. Instead, he chose to fight. This war had to come to an end. It had dragged out for far too long, and far too many of his friends had been lost within it. No more of that shall happen, not while he was still standing to fight, no, to win. That is what Izuku vowed in his heart to do. He picked up his last remaining snowball, held it tightly and breathed before turning the corner, and charging headfirst into battle with all that was left of Class A. They fought, they truly did. Their souls became connected through a single goal, and they poured their hearts out into every move they made with their bodies. Some fell, as the rest had in the past, meeting a heroic end on the edge of the battlefield, not a shroud of regret being carried with them. As for the rest, they stood bravely and battled for the long-awaited conclusion. When it was all said and done, there was nothing but bits and pieces of their forts, smashed to smithereens by each other, all in a game of meaningless conflict, ignited by a long-carried rivalry, ending only in nothing. That was war, and war never changes. To give something, in hopes to achieve something greater than what you have already lost, and therefore to end in nothing. UA Dormitory Commons Room Evening. To Class 1A. Mina cheered, holding up a cup of hot chocolate. Yes, Class 1A did in fact emerge victorious in the long and very drawn-out snowball battle. It took them much longer than they expected, but what a fun way to spend the day. Now, most of them were curled up in the commons room with blankets wrapped tightly around them to snuggle in. As mentioned before, the battle lasted a while, and so our brave young heroes were cold as ever. They craved heat, especially Tsayu, who was not suited for winter at all. She had at least 2 blankets around her and Ichako by her side for comfort. Izuku had walked by when Ichako caught him. Hey Deku. She called out, looking at him from an upside-down perspective as her head rested right up against the cushion of the couch. You were really great out there today. Me? Well, you were amazing. He nervously scratched the side of his head, shooting her an awkward smile. Their faces lit up yet again, for perhaps the 5th time this week, sending them both into a frenzy. I'll see you tomorrow. Okay, bye. She said as he sped off towards his room. The girl sunk back into the couch, fluttering her eyes as a heavy sigh left her. Ichako thought this would be easier, speaking to him after she had become certain of her plans, but this was only proving to be more difficult than the girl had hoped. Christmas was in 4 days, so it better be easier by the time it mattered. Shadow Todoroki's room evening. As the evening rolled around and everyone settled into bed, one student did not count on sleeping. Shadow sat with his back against the door and knees propped up in front of him. His palm was covering the left side of the young man's face, as he reflected on what had happened today. Earlier, during the snowball fight, Momo had saved him from being hit. Moments later, as they lay together in the snow, did he feel himself drawn closer to her, almost as if by some malevolent force. I almost kissed her. He thought to himself. I wanted to kiss her. He pondered on this revelation. Shadow had wanted to kiss Momo, but why? Did he like her? Momo was smart, thoughtful, beautiful, but was what he thought of her enough to say conclusively that he felt this way around her? One could say most of those things about a friend as well. Lately, however, before the winter break had even started, he had found himself trying to be next to her, and he chalked it up to simply enjoying her company, and now the boy was getting a new perspective about her that he himself might have missed. He was so withdrawn sometimes that he would not have been surprised that he ignored feelings that he held in his heart. Did he feel that way for Momo? Maybe, but he couldn't just sleep on it now, nor did he want to. He was very sleepy though, and considered that getting a good night's rest would help him think clear. Momo, on the other hand, well, she went to sleep feeling a lot more certain. So, as the Battle of the Break came to an end and the storm moved on, as did our young heroes, onto the next day that is. Tomorrow held lots of surprises for the students of Class 1A, as many of them would be setting their sights out into the hills to sled, that is, into the unknown. Until next time, we will hopefully see them again soon. Well guys, that is it for this special anyway. Have a good Christmas, goodbye.